In the beginning, before the first dawn painted the sky or the first breath stirred the air, there existed only none, the vast, dark waters of primordial chaos that stretched endlessly in all directions. Within these turbulent depths, where no light had ever penetrated and no sound had ever echoed, the seeds of creation lay dormant, waiting for the moment when consciousness would first spark into existence. From these infinite waters emerged a figure unlike any that would follow in the pantheon of Egyptian deities. Thoth materialized not through birth in any conventional sense, but through an act of pure intellectual will. The ancient texts describe his emergence as a sudden crystallization of thought itself, rising from the chaotic waters with his distinctive ibis head gleaming silver-white against the darkness, his long curved beak cutting through the primordial mist like a scribe's reed through papyrus. Unlike other deities who required parentage or divine intervention for their creation, Thoth brought himself into being through the fundamental power that would define his eternal nature, the power of the spoken and written word. As consciousness first stirred within the chaos of Nun, it was Thoth who gave voice to existence itself. His first utterance was not a cry or a roar, but the careful pronunciation of his own name, each syllable precisely articulated and imbued with the creative force that would separate order from chaos. The mythology surrounding his self-creation reveals the sophisticated understanding ancient Egyptians had of language as a creative force. Thoth spoke himself into existence by declaring his nature, his purpose, and his divine authority over the written word. As he pronounced each aspect of his being, it became manifest reality. When he declared himself the master of hieroglyphs, the sacred symbols appeared in the air around him, glowing with divine light. When he proclaimed his dominion over mathematics and measurement, the fundamental principles of geometry and calculation took their place in the cosmic order. His physical form reflected this intellectual genesis. Standing tall with the body of a man but bearing the head of an ibis, Thoth possessed an otherworldly elegance that spoke to his role as mediator between the divine and mortal realms. His ibis head, with its distinctive curved beak and keen eyes, was perfectly adapted for the precise work of writing and measurement. The ancient Egyptians observed how the ibis used its beak to probe carefully into the mud of the Nile, extracting exactly what it needed with surgical precision, a perfect metaphor for how Thoth would extract truth from the chaos of existence and record it with divine accuracy. In some accounts, Thoth manifested in his alternative form as a baboon, specifically the sacred baboon whose intelligence and manual dexterity made it an ideal symbol for the god of wisdom and writing. When appearing as a baboon, Thoth retained his silver-white colouring, but his hands became more prominent, emphasizing his role as the divine scribe whose fingers would shape the destiny of gods and mortals, alike through the power of documentation. As Thoth established his presence in the primordial realm, he immediately set about his first great task, participating in the fundamental act of creation itself. The cosmogonic texts describe how the world began in a state of complete undifferentiation, where heaven and earth existed as a single compressed entity within the waters of Nun. The separation of these two fundamental realms required not just raw creative power, but precise planning and documentation to ensure that the cosmic order would function properly once established. Thoth's role in this cosmic separation was not that of a brute force-wielding deity, but rather the divine architect who calculated the exact specifications for how the separation should occur. Before the sky goddess Nut could be lifted above the earth god Geb, Thoth had to determine the precise measurements, angles, and structural supports that would maintain this separation for eternity. His calculations covered everything from the height at which the sky should be suspended to the positions of the stars that would serve as celestial landmarks. Working with reed and papyrus that materialized from his divine will, Thoth created the first blueprints of creation. These were not mere drawings, but documents imbued with creative power that would serve as the fundamental laws governing the physical universe. Every measurement he recorded became an immutable cosmic principle, every diagram he drew became a template that reality would follow. The ancient Egyptians believed that the reason the natural world operated with such mathematical precision, from the flooding cycles of the Nile to the movements of celestial bodies, was because Thoth had first calculated and recorded these patterns during the primordial act of creation. When the moment came for the actual separation of heaven and earth, Thoth stood ready with his writing implements. As the cosmic forces began to pull Nut and Geb apart, he meticulously recorded every stage of the process. His documentation served multiple purposes. It ensured that the separation proceeded according to the divine plan. It created a permanent record of how the universe was structured, and it established the precedent that all significant cosmic events must be properly documented to maintain their legitimacy and permanence. The separation itself was a gradual process that required constant monitoring and adjustment. As Nut was slowly lifted to form the star-spangled sky, Thoth calculated the stress points and reinforcement needed to prevent cosmic collapse. When Geb settled into his role as the Earth, Thoth recorded the boundaries of his domain and the principles that would govern terrestrial life. Every mountain that rose, every valley that formed, every river that began to flow was noted in Thoth's cosmic ledger with precise descriptions and measurements. This documentation process established Thoth as the divine secretary of creation, but his role extended far beyond mere record-keeping. His writings became the fundamental laws that would govern the universe throughout its existence. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order and balance, could only be maintained because Thoth had first defined what that order should look like and created the documentation necessary to preserve it. As the physical universe took shape according to his specifications, Thoth began to establish the principles that would govern divine society itself. He created the first protocols for how gods should interact with one another, establishing hierarchies of authority and systems of accountability that would prevent the cosmos from sliding back into chaos. His documentation of divine roles and responsibilities became the constitution of the Egyptian pantheon, referenced whenever disputes arose or new situations required divine intervention. The establishment of Thoth as the divine secretary also meant that he became the keeper of divine secrets and the arbiter of truth. No god could claim credit for deeds they had not performed, because Thoth's records provided an objective account of all divine actions. No cosmic law could be changed without his approval, because he alone possessed the complete documentation of how the universe was designed to function. This made him simultaneously one of the most trusted and most feared members of the pantheon. His record-keeping extended to the monitoring of cosmic balance itself. Thoth developed sophisticated systems for tracking the flow of energy throughout the universe, documenting how actions in one realm affected conditions in others. He recorded the karmic debts of both gods and mortals, maintaining the complex accounting that ensured justice would ultimately prevail. His ledgers contained entries for every act of kindness and every moment of cruelty, every instance of wisdom, and every display of foolishness. The scope of Thoth's documentation was truly cosmic in scale. He recorded not just major events like the creation of the world, but also the smallest details of daily existence. The growth of every plant, the birth of every animal, the thoughts of every conscious being, all were noted in his vast archives. This comprehensive documentation system served as the foundation for the Egyptian understanding of how individual actions connected to cosmic consequences. Through his emergence from primordial chaos and his establishment as the divine scribe, Thoth had fundamentally altered the nature of existence itself. Before his appearance, the universe operated through raw force and instinct. After his establishment as the keeper of cosmic records, existence became governed by law, precedent, and documented procedure. The transition from chaos to order was not just a physical transformation, but an intellectual and bureaucratic revolution that placed knowledge and documentation at the center of cosmic governance. The physical manifestation of Thoth represented far more than mere divine preference for avian form. It embodied the very essence of intellectual precision and cosmic observation that would define his eternal role in Egyptian mythology. The ibis, with its distinctive curved beak and methodical hunting patterns, served as the perfect vessel for a deity whose primary function involved the careful extraction and preservation of knowledge from the vast chaos of existence. Ancient Egyptian texts describe Thoth's ibis form with remarkable specificity, emphasizing how each anatomical feature served a divine purpose. His elongated, curved beak functioned as the ultimate precision instrument, capable of inscribing the smallest hieroglyphic details onto papyrus or extracting the most delicate truths from complex situations. The beak's curvature mirrored the arc of celestial bodies across the sky, making Thoth's very head a living astronomical instrument that could calculate planetary movements and stellar positions with divine accuracy. The ibis's natural behaviour patterns provided the mythological foundation for Thoth's role as the supreme measurer and calculator. Just as the earthly ibis would wade through the Nile's waters with careful, deliberate steps, probing the muddy bottom with mathematical precision to locate its prey, Thoth navigated the murky waters of cosmic mysteries with the same methodical approach. His divine consciousness operated like the ibis's hunting instincts, patient, systematic, and unfailingly accurate in its pursuit of truth. The sacred ibis's white plumage held profound symbolic significance in Egyptian cosmology. White represented purity of thought, clarity of vision, and the untainted nature of divine knowledge. When Thoth appeared in his ibis form, his brilliant white feathers caught and reflected light in ways that made him appear to glow with inner wisdom. This luminous quality was not merely decorative but functional. Ancient Egyptians believed that Thoth's radiant appearance allowed him to illuminate dark corners of ignorance and bring enlightenment to any situation requiring divine intervention. The ibis's long, thin legs provided another layer of symbolic meaning. These appendages, perfectly adapted for wading through water without disturbing the sediment below, represented Thoth's ability to move through the depths of cosmic knowledge without clouding or corrupting the information he sought to preserve. His careful, measured steps through the realm of divine wisdom ensured that no detail would be lost or distorted in the process of documentation. The connection between Thoth's ibis form and celestial observations extended beyond mere symbolism into practical divine function. The ibis's keen eyesight, evolved for spotting fish beneath the water's surface, translated into Thoth's supernatural ability to perceive patterns and connections that remained invisible to other deities. He could observe the subtle influences of stellar movements on earthly events, track the complex relationships between seemingly unrelated phenomena, and detect the earliest signs of cosmic imbalance before they manifested as serious threats to universal order. Egyptian astronomers and mathematicians recognized that the ibis's feeding patterns followed precise timing related to tidal changes and seasonal variations. This natural chronometry made the ibis an ideal symbol for a deity responsible for maintaining cosmic schedules and ensuring that all universal processes occurred according to their predetermined timing. Thoth's ibis form embodied the principle that true wisdom required not just knowledge, but the ability to apply that knowledge at exactly the right moment. The transformation into baboon form revealed entirely different aspects of Thoth's divine nature, though equally significant to his role as the supreme deity of wisdom and knowledge. The baboon manifestation typically occurred during the crucial moments of dawn, when the first light of Ra's solar bark appeared on the eastern horizon. In this form, Thoth appeared as a large, powerful baboon with silver-grey fur that seemed to shimmer with reflected starlight, even as the darkness gave way to day. The baboon's natural behaviour patterns provided the mythological framework for understanding this aspect of Thoth's divine personality. Baboons in the wild are known for their complex social structures, sophisticated communication systems, and remarkable problem-solving abilities. These characteristics translated into divine attributes that made the baboon form particularly suitable for Thoth's role as the mediator between different levels of cosmic consciousness. When manifesting as a baboon, Thoth's hands became the focal point of his divine power. Baboon hands, with their remarkable dexterity and sensitivity, could manipulate the finest writing instruments with precision that surpassed even the most skilled human scribes. Ancient Egyptian artists depicted Thoth's baboon form with particular attention to these hands, showing them holding reed pens, adjusting scales of justice, or manipulating complex geometric instruments used for cosmic calculations. The baboon's vocal capabilities added another dimension to Thoth's divine arsenal. Baboons communicate through a sophisticated system of calls, gestures, and facial expressions that allows them to convey complex information across considerable distances. In his baboon form, Thoth could produce vocalizations that carried divine authority across all realms of existence. These calls serve various functions, summoning other deities to cosmic conferences, announcing the arrival of significant celestial events, or proclaiming divine judgments that required immediate universal acknowledgement. The connection between the baboon form and dawn worship stemmed from the animal's natural behaviour of greeting the sunrise with distinctive vocalizations. Ancient Egyptians observed that baboons would position themselves facing east before dawn and begin calling as the first light appeared, continuing their vocalizations until the sun had fully risen. This behaviour pattern made the baboon a natural symbol for the daily renewal of cosmic order and the perpetual victory of light over darkness. Thoth's baboon manifestation during dawn hours served multiple cosmic functions. As the sun god Ra began his daily journey across the sky, Thoth in baboon form would stand at the prow of the solar bark, using his keen eyesight to navigate through the dangerous waters of the underworld and back into the realm of the living. His position at the front of the divine vessel allowed him to spot obstacles, threats, or opportunities that might affect the sun's journey, ensuring that each day would unfold according to divine plan. The intellectual attributes that made Thoth the patron deity of scribes, scholars, and all forms of learning derived from his unique position as the only deity who had witnessed and documented the entire process of creation. Unlike other gods who specialized in specific aspects of existence, Thoth possessed comprehensive knowledge that spanned all domains of cosmic activity. This universal expertise made him the natural mentor and protector of anyone engaged in intellectual pursuits. Scribes held a particularly sacred relationship with Thoth because their profession required the same qualities that defined his divine nature: precision, patience, attention to detail, and absolute commitment to accuracy. The act of writing itself was considered a form of divine worship, with each carefully formed hieroglyph serving as a prayer to Thoth for continued wisdom and clarity of thought. Professional scribes would begin their work each day with invocations to Thoth, asking for his guidance in avoiding errors and his blessing in producing documents that would serve their intended purposes effectively. The tools of the scribe, reed pens, papyrus, ink, and measuring instruments, were all considered sacred objects imbued with Thoth's divine essence. The reed pen in particular held special significance because its hollow structure allowed it to channel divine inspiration from Thoth's realm into the physical world through the medium of written language. Scribes would carefully prepare their reed pens with ritual attention, understanding that the quality of their writing instruments directly affected their ability to receive and transmit divine wisdom. Scholars and learned individuals across all disciplines recognized Thoth as their ultimate patron because his influence extended far beyond mere writing into all forms of intellectual endeavour. Mathematicians sought his guidance in developing new calculation methods and solving complex problems. Astronomers relied on his cosmic knowledge to interpret celestial phenomena and predict future astronomical events. Physicians called upon his wisdom in diagnosing illnesses and developing effective treatments. Architects and engineers invoked his precision in designing structures that would stand for millennia. The invention of hieroglyphic writing represented Thoth's most significant contribution to both divine and mortal civilization. The creation of this complex writing system required not just artistic creativity, but profound understanding of how visual symbols could capture and preserve the full complexity of spoken language, abstract concepts, and spiritual truths. Hieroglyphic writing was not simply a practical communication tool, but a sacred technology that allowed consciousness itself to be externalized and preserved beyond the limitations of individual memory. The process of creating hieroglyphic symbols involved careful observation of natural forms and their symbolic associations. Each hieroglyph had to capture not just the visual appearance of its subject, but also its essential spiritual qualities and its relationships to other elements in the cosmic order. The symbol for water, for example, had to convey not just the physical properties of liquid, but also its associations with life, purification, chaos, fertility, and transformation. This level of symbolic complexity required divine wisdom that only Thoth possessed. The sacred nature of hieroglyphic writing meant that the act of creating or reading these symbols established a direct connection between the practitioner and the divine realm. Each time a scribe formed a hieroglyph, they participated in the ongoing process of creation itself, using Thoth's divine gift to bring order and meaning to the chaos of unrecorded experience. This understanding made literacy a form of priesthood, with educated individuals serving as intermediaries between the divine wisdom preserved in written form and the broader population who relied on oral tradition. Thoth's role as the keeper of all divine and mortal knowledge placed him at the centre of a vast cosmic library that contained every piece of information that had ever existed or would ever come into being. This divine archive was not simply a passive repository, but an active system that continuously processed, cross-referenced, and updated its contents to reflect the ever-changing state of universal knowledge. The library existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, with physical scrolls and tablets in earthly temples serving as partial reflections of the complete divine collection. The organization of this cosmic knowledge required sophisticated classification systems that could accommodate the full spectrum of information, from practical technical instructions to abstract philosophical principles. Thoth developed comprehensive indexing methods that allowed any piece of information to be located instantly, regardless of how obscure or specialized it might be. These organizational systems became the models for earthly libraries and schools, establishing the intellectual frameworks that would guide human learning for millennia. Access to different levels of divine knowledge was carefully regulated according to the wisdom and spiritual development of the seeker. Basic practical information was freely available to anyone who approached with sincere intent to learn. More advanced knowledge required demonstrated competence and moral worthiness. The highest levels of cosmic wisdom were reserved for those who had achieved sufficient spiritual development to handle such powerful information responsibly. Thoth served as the ultimate gatekeeper, determining who was ready for each level of divine revelation. The cosmic library that Thoth maintained contained more than just records of creation and divine wisdom. It held the complete documentation of every conflict, dispute, and crisis that had ever threatened the stability of the universe. Among these records, none held greater significance than the detailed accounts of the great struggle between Osiris and Set, a conflict that would establish Thoth's reputation as the supreme divine mediator and judge, whose impartial wisdom could restore order even in the most chaotic circumstances. The origins of this cosmic crisis lay in the fundamental tensions between order and chaos that had existed since the first moments of creation. Set, the god of storms, violence, and the untamed desert, possessed a nature that naturally opposed the civilized order that his brother Osiris represented. While Osiris brought agriculture, law, and peaceful governance to the land of Egypt, Set embodied the destructive forces that constantly threatened to tear down these achievements and return the world to its primordial state of chaos. The mythological accounts describe how Set's jealousy of his brother's success and popularity among both gods and mortals gradually transformed into an all-consuming obsession with destroying everything Osiris had built. Set's domain in the harsh desert regions provided him with ample opportunity to observe the prosperity that flourished under Osiris's rule in the fertile Nile Valley, and this constant reminder of his brother's achievements fed his resentment until it reached a breaking point that would shake the foundations of the cosmic order. Set's plot to eliminate his brother required careful planning and deception, qualities that seemed at odds with his chaotic nature, but demonstrated the dangerous intelligence that made him such a formidable opponent. The conspiracy began with Set commissioning a beautifully crafted sarcophagus, designed with precise measurements that would fit Osiris's body perfectly. The creation of this trap involved corrupting craftsmen and deceiving them about the true purpose of their work, showing Set's willingness to spread his influence through lies and manipulation. The execution of Set's plan took place during a great feast where both divine and mortal guests had gathered to celebrate the prosperity of Egypt under Osiris's rule. Set presented the magnificent sarcophagus as a gift, announcing that whoever could fit inside it perfectly would be allowed to keep it. The assembled guests took turns lying in the ornate coffin, but none achieved the perfect fit that Set had engineered specifically for his brother's dimensions. When Osiris finally took his turn, the trap was sprung with devastating efficiency. The moment Osiris lay down in the sarcophagus, Set's conspirators rushed forward to seal the lid and secure it with molten lead, creating an airtight prison that would become a tomb. The speed and coordination of this attack demonstrated that Set had planned every detail meticulously, leaving nothing to chance that might allow his brother to escape or call for help. The sealed sarcophagus was immediately carried to the Nile and cast into the waters, where the current would carry it far from Egypt and any possibility of rescue. The immediate aftermath of Osiris's disappearance created a crisis that threatened to destroy not just Egypt, but the cosmic order itself. Without Osiris's stabilizing influence, the forces of chaos began to reassert themselves across the land. The Nile's flooding became erratic, crops failed, and the carefully maintained balance between civilization and wilderness started to collapse. The other gods found themselves unable to compensate for Osiris's absence, as his role in maintaining Ma'at had been so fundamental that no single deity could replace his contributions. Isis, Osiris's devoted wife and sister, refused to accept her husband's death as final and embarked on a desperate search to recover his body and restore him to life. Her quest took her across Egypt and into foreign lands, following every rumour and sign that might lead to the sarcophagus. The search required not just determination, but considerable magical skill, as Isis had to use her powers of divination and transformation to track the coffin's path through waters that had carried it far from its point of origin. The discovery of Osiris's body in Byblos, where the sarcophagus had become embedded in a great tree that was subsequently cut down and used as a pillar in the king's palace, marked only the beginning of Isis's efforts to restore her husband. The delicate process of extracting the sarcophagus from the pillar and transporting it back to Egypt required diplomatic skill and magical intervention, as Isis had to convince foreign rulers to allow her to dismantle part of their palace without revealing the true nature of her mission. Set's discovery that Isis had recovered Osiris's body and was attempting to restore him to life triggered an even more violent phase of the conflict. Driven by rage and the knowledge that his initial plan had failed, Set attacked the hidden location where Isis was performing the resurrection rituals. The confrontation between Set and Isis resulted in the destruction of Osiris's body, which Set tore into 14 pieces and scattered across Egypt to prevent any future attempts at resurrection. This act of ultimate desecration created a crisis that exceeded even the original murder in its threat to cosmic stability. The dismemberment of Osiris represented an attack on the very concept of death and resurrection that maintained the cycle of renewal essential to universal order. Without the possibility of proper death and rebirth, the entire system of cosmic regeneration faced collapse. threatening to trap the universe in a state of eternal stagnation. The magnitude of this crisis demanded intervention from the highest levels of divine authority, and it was at this critical moment that Thoth stepped forward to assume his role as the supreme mediator and judge. His involvement began not with dramatic pronouncements or displays of power, but with the careful documentation and analysis that characterized all his divine activities. Thoth methodically recorded every aspect of the conflict, creating detailed accounts of Set's crimes, Isis's efforts at restoration, and the cosmic consequences of the ongoing crisis. Thoth's investigation revealed that the conflict between Set and Osiris represented more than just a personal dispute between brothers. It embodied the fundamental tension between order and chaos that required constant management to maintain universal stability. His analysis showed that neither complete victory by either side would serve the greater good, as absolute order would lead to stagnation while unchecked chaos would result in destruction. The solution required a more nuanced approach that would acknowledge the legitimate aspects of both positions, while preventing either from overwhelming the other. The divine tribunal that Thoth convened to address the crisis brought together representatives from all aspects of the cosmic order. The proceedings required careful management to ensure that every relevant perspective was heard while preventing the emotional intensity of the conflict from disrupting the deliberative process. Thoth's role as presiding judge demanded not just wisdom and impartiality, but the diplomatic skill necessary to manage powerful deities whose passions had been inflamed by the ongoing crisis. The evidence presented during the tribunal proceedings revealed the complex web of causation and consequence that had led to the current crisis. Set's supporters argued that Osiris's approach to governance had been too rigid and controlling, stifling the natural forces of change and renewal that Set represented. Isis and her allies countered that Set's actions had gone far beyond legitimate opposition to constitute an assault on the fundamental principles that maintained cosmic order. Thoth's judgment in this cosmic trial established precedents that would govern divine behavior for eternity. His ruling acknowledged that Set's concerns about the need for change and renewal had some validity, but condemned the methods he'd chosen to address these issues. The destruction of Osiris's body was declared a crime against the cosmic order that required both punishment and restoration. However, Thoth's wisdom recognized that simply punishing Set would not address the underlying tensions that had caused the crisis. The restoration of Osiris required Thoth to exercise his most advanced magical abilities in collaboration with Isis and other deities skilled in the arts of healing and resurrection. The process began with the careful collection of all 14 pieces of Osiris's dismembered body, a task that required divine intervention to locate fragments that Set had hidden in the most remote and dangerous locations across Egypt. Each recovered piece had to be purified and prepared for the complex reconstruction process that would follow. The magical techniques employed in Osiris's restoration involved principles that Thoth had developed during his study of cosmic creation and regeneration. The reassembly of the dismembered body required not just physical reconstruction, but the restoration of the spiritual connections between different aspects of Osiris's divine nature. Thoth's documentation of the original creation process provided the templates necessary to ensure that the restoration would produce a complete and functional divine being, rather than a mere simulacrum. The resurrection ritual itself took place in a specially prepared sanctuary, where Thoth had created optimal conditions for the delicate magical work required. The process involved the careful coordination of multiple divine powers, with each participating deity contributing specific abilities, while Thoth maintained overall control to ensure that the various magical forces worked in harmony rather than interference. The complexity of this undertaking demonstrated why Thoth's role as cosmic mediator was so essential. No other deity possessed the comprehensive knowledge and impartial authority necessary to coordinate such a massive collaborative effort. The success of Osiris's restoration marked a turning point in the cosmic crisis, but it also created new challenges that required Thoth's continued mediation. The restored Osiris could not simply resume his previous role as ruler of Egypt, as his death and resurrection had fundamentally altered his divine nature and cosmic function. The experience of dismemberment and restoration had given him unique insights into the processes of death and renewal, making him ideally suited to govern the realm of the dead rather than the land of the living. Thoth's role in facilitating Osiris's transition to his new position as judge of the dead required careful negotiation with other deities who had assumed various responsibilities during his absence. The redistribution of divine roles and responsibilities had to be accomplished without creating new conflicts or disrupting the cosmic balance that had been so carefully restored. This delicate process demonstrated Thoth's skill not just as a judge and mediator, but as a divine administrator capable of managing complex organizational transitions. The establishment of Osiris in his new role as ruler of the Underworld created the foundation for the elaborate system of afterlife judgment that would become central to Egyptian religious practice. Thoth's involvement in designing the system drew upon his comprehensive knowledge of cosmic law and his experience in mediating disputes between powerful entities with conflicting interests. The procedures he developed for evaluating the worthiness of deceased souls reflected the same principles of careful investigation and impartial judgment that had guided his resolution of the crisis between Osiris and Set. Set's punishment for his crimes required Thoth to balance the demands of justice with the need to maintain cosmic stability. Simply destroying or permanently imprisoning Set would have eliminated an essential aspect of the cosmic order, as his chaotic nature served important functions in preventing the universe from becoming too rigid and stagnant. Thoth's solution involved restricting Set's activities while allowing him to continue serving his legitimate cosmic functions under careful supervision and clear limitations. The long-term consequences of Thoth's mediation in the Osiris-Set conflict established him as the ultimate authority on divine justice and the maintenance of cosmic order. His reputation for wisdom, impartiality, and effective problem-solving made him the natural choice to mediate future disputes between gods and to serve as the final arbiter when conflicts threatened universal stability. The precedents he established during this crisis became the foundation for all subsequent divine jurisprudence and conflict resolution. The detailed documentation that Thoth maintained throughout the crisis provided future generations with a complete record of how cosmic conflicts should be investigated, adjudicated, and resolved. These records became essential reference materials for anyone seeking to understand the principles of divine justice and the complex relationships between order and chaos that governed universal existence. The thoroughness of Thoth's documentation ensured that the lessons learned from this crisis would not be forgotten and could guide future responses to similar threats to cosmic stability. The cosmic responsibilities that Thoth had accumulated through his mediation of divine conflicts and his role as the supreme keeper of knowledge naturally expanded to encompass the regulation of time itself. His dominion over the moon emerged not as a separate divine appointment, but as the logical extension of his fundamental nature, as the deity who brought order to chaos through precise measurement and documentation. The lunar sphere, with its predictable cycles and mathematical precision, provided the perfect celestial instrument for a god whose essence was rooted in calculation and systematic observation. The ancient Egyptians recognized that the moon's phases followed patterns that could be measured, predicted, and used as the foundation for organizing both religious observances and agricultural activities. Unlike the sun's daily journey, which provided a basic unit of time measurement, the moon's monthly cycle offered a more complex temporal framework that required sophisticated mathematical understanding to utilize effectively. The lunar month of approximately 29.5 days created calculation challenges that demanded divine intervention to resolve. making Thoth's mathematical expertise essential for creating a functional calendar system. Thoth's assumption of lunar authority began with his careful observation and documentation of the moon's behaviour across multiple cycles. His ibis form proved ideally suited for this astronomical work, as the bird's exceptional night vision allowed him to track even the faintest lunar crescents that appeared just before dawn or immediately after sunset. Standing motionless for hours at a time, Thoth would observe the moon's position relative to the fixed stars, measuring its movements with divine precision and recording every detail in his cosmic ledgers. The complexity of lunar motion required Thoth to develop advanced mathematical techniques that went far beyond simple counting. The moon's orbit around Earth created apparent variations in its speed and position that followed patterns invisible to casual observation. Thoth's calculations revealed that these variations occurred in predictable cycles that could be expressed through sophisticated mathematical formulas. His work in lunar astronomy established the mathematical foundations that would later influence all Egyptian achievements in engineering, architecture, and navigation. The creation of the Egyptian calendar system represented one of Thoth's most significant contributions to both divine and mortal civilization. The challenge lay in reconciling the lunar month of 29.5 days with the solar year of 365.25 days, a mathematical problem that required divine wisdom to solve effectively. Simple multiplication revealed that 12 lunar months totaled only 354 days, creating an 11-day discrepancy with the solar year that would cause the calendar to drift significantly over time if left uncorrected. Thoth's solution involved the development of a complex intercalation system that added extra days at specific intervals to maintain alignment between lunar and solar cycles. This system required careful calculation of when and how many additional days should be inserted to prevent the calendar from drifting away from the seasonal patterns that governed agricultural activities. The mathematical precision required for these calculations demonstrated why only a deity of Thoth's intellectual capabilities could successfully manage the temporal organization of the universe. The practical implementation of this calendar system required Thoth to work closely with the priesthood responsible for maintaining religious observances and the agricultural administrators who needed reliable seasonal predictions. His lunar calendar became the foundation for determining when religious festivals should occur, when agricultural activities should begin, and when important state ceremonies should be conducted. The accuracy of these temporal predictions was essential for maintaining Ma'at, as disruptions to the proper timing of cosmic activities could threaten the stability of the entire universal order. The mythological account of how Thoth acquired the additional days necessary to perfect his calendar system reveals both his intellectual cunning and his willingness to engage in cosmic negotiations that other deities would have considered beneath their dignity. The story begins with the sky goddess Nut, who had been cursed by Ra to be unable to give birth on any day of the existing 360-day year. This curse effectively prevented Nut from producing the children she had conceived, creating a cosmic crisis that threatened the continuity of divine generations. Nut's predicament required a solution that involved creating new days that existed outside Ra's original curse. A seemingly impossible task that demanded both mathematical precision and diplomatic skill. Thoth recognized that the only way to create additional days was to win them from other celestial deities who possessed temporal authority. The most logical target for such negotiations was Khonsu, the young moon god whose domain overlapped with Thoth's own lunar responsibilities, but who lacked the mathematical sophistication necessary to fully utilize his temporal resources. The gambling contest between Thoth and Khonsu took place in a specially constructed, cosmic gaming hall where the stakes were measured not in material wealth, but in temporal authority itself. The game chosen for this momentous contest was Senet, the Egyptian board game that symbolized the journey through life and death. The choice of Senet was particularly appropriate because the game's outcome depended on both strategic thinking and chance, reflecting the dual nature of cosmic governance that required both planning and adaptability. Thoth's approach to the gaming contest demonstrated the same methodical preparation that characterized all his divine activities. He spent considerable time studying Khonsu's playing style, analysing the young god's strategic preferences and identifying patterns that could be exploited. The preparation also involved careful calculation of probability and the development of strategic approaches that would maximise his chances of success while minimising the risk of catastrophic failure. The contest itself unfolded over multiple games, with each victory allowing the winner to claim a portion of the loser's temporal authority. Thoth's superior strategic thinking and mathematical understanding of probability gradually gave him the advantage, though Khonsu's youth and intuitive playing style created several moments of uncertainty. The tension of the contest was heightened by the cosmic significance of its outcome, as failure would have left Nut permanently unable to give birth and disrupted the planned succession of divine generations. Thoth's ultimate victory in the gaming contest netted him enough temporal authority to create 5 additional days, which he immediately added to the existing 360-day year to create the 365-day calendar that would become the foundation of the Egyptian timekeeping. These 5 epigomenal days existed outside the normal calendar structure, making them perfect for Nut's purposes since they fell outside the scope of Ra's original curse. The mathematical elegance of this solution demonstrated Thoth's ability to find practical answers to seemingly impossible cosmic problems. The birth of Nut's 5 children during these additional days created a new generation of deities whose existence was directly tied to Thoth's temporal innovations. Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder each emerged on one of the epigomenal days, making them cosmic beings whose very existence depended on Thoth's mathematical and diplomatic achievements. This connection established Thoth as a kind of divine godfather to these important deities, creating relationships that would prove crucial during future cosmic crises. The successful resolution of Nut's predicament established Thoth's reputation as the master of temporal manipulation and the ultimate authority on calendar systems. His ability to create new time through mathematical calculation and strategic negotiation demonstrated powers that went beyond mere knowledge to encompass the fundamental manipulation of cosmic structure itself. This achievement elevated Thoth's status within the divine hierarchy and established him as an essential figure in maintaining the temporal order that governed all existence. The responsibility for recording the passage of time and marking the festivals and sacred days of the Egyptian year required Thoth to develop sophisticated administrative systems that could track multiple overlapping temporal cycles simultaneously. His cosmic calendar had to account not only for lunar months and solar years, but also for the complex patterns of stellar movements, planetary conjunctions, and divine anniversaries that influenced the proper timing of religious observances. The festival calendar that Thoth created and maintained represented a masterpiece of temporal coordination that ensured all religious observances occurred at their cosmically appropriate moments. Each festival was timed to coincide with specific astronomical events that enhanced its spiritual significance and effectiveness. The timing of agricultural festivals aligned with seasonal changes that optimized farming activities, while religious ceremonies were scheduled to take advantage of favorable celestial influences that strengthened their connection to divine power. Thoth's festival calendar required constant monitoring and occasional adjustment to maintain its accuracy over long periods. The gradual precession of the equinoxes and other subtle astronomical changes meant that festival dates had to be periodically recalculated to preserve their alignment with the celestial events they were meant to commemorate. This ongoing maintenance work required Thoth to maintain detailed astronomical observations and to perform complex calculations that kept the calendar system functioning with divine precision. The sacred days that Thoth designated throughout the Egyptian year served multiple functions beyond simple religious observance. These specially marked dates created temporal landmarks that helped organise both divine and mortal activities around cosmically significant moments. The spacing and timing of sacred days provided natural rhythms that supported the psychological and spiritual well-being of the population, while ensuring that divine powers received appropriate recognition and worship at regular intervals. The connection between lunar cycles, wisdom, and the hidden mysteries that Thoth protected and revealed represented one of the most profound aspects of his divine nature. The moon's phases provided a natural metaphor for the process of revelation and concealment that characterized the transmission of divine knowledge. Just as the moon waxed from new to full before waning back to darkness, wisdom followed patterns of gradual revelation that required careful timing and appropriate preparation from those seeking enlightenment. The new moon phase corresponded to periods when divine mysteries were most deeply concealed, accessible only to those who possessed the highest levels of spiritual development and intellectual preparation. During these dark nights, Thoth would work in his cosmic library, organizing knowledge and preparing revelations for those ready to receive them. The darkness of the new moon provided optimal conditions for the most sensitive magical and intellectual work, as the absence of lunar light eliminated distractions and allowed for complete focus on subtle cosmic patterns. The waxing moon phases represented periods of gradual revelation, when Thoth would begin to share selected knowledge with qualified seekers. The increasing lunar illumination symbolized the growing understanding that came to those who approached divine wisdom with proper preparation and sincere intent. Each night of the waxing moon brought additional insights and deeper comprehension of cosmic principles, building toward the full revelation that would come with the complete lunar illumination. The full moon marked the culmination of each monthly cycle of wisdom transmission, when Thoth's teachings reached their maximum accessibility and power. During these nights of complete lunar illumination, even relatively unprepared seekers could receive divine insights that would normally require years of study and spiritual development to attain. The full moon's energy amplified all forms of intellectual and spiritual activity, making it the optimal time for important magical workings, scholarly research, and religious ceremonies requiring divine inspiration. The waning moon phases corresponded to periods of integration and practical application, when the wisdom received during the waxing and full moon periods was processed and incorporated into daily life. These declining lunar phases provided optimal conditions for the careful documentation and preservation of divine revelations, ensuring that the knowledge gained during periods of heightened accessibility would not be lost when the moon returned to darkness. Thoth's own documentation activities often intensified during waning moon periods, as he worked to record and organize the insights that had emerged during the cycle's more illuminated phases. The cyclical nature of lunar wisdom transmission created a natural educational system that accommodated different levels of spiritual and intellectual development. Beginning students could start their studies during any phase of the lunar cycle, gradually developing the sensitivity and preparation necessary to access deeper levels of divine knowledge as their understanding matured. Advanced practitioners could synchronize their most important work with specific lunar phases that provided optimal conditions for their particular areas of study and practice. The hidden mysteries that Thoth protected through lunar symbolism included knowledge that could be dangerous or destructive if revealed to unprepared minds. The moon's phases provided a natural screening mechanism that ensured sensitive information would only become accessible to those who had demonstrated the patience, dedication, and wisdom necessary to handle such powerful knowledge responsibly. This protective aspect of lunar wisdom transmission reflected Thoth's role as both the revealer and guardian of divine knowledge, ensuring that cosmic secrets would enhance rather than threaten universal order. The mathematical precision of lunar cycles provided Thoth with a reliable mechanism for timing the revelation of different types of knowledge according to cosmic conditions that would optimize their reception and application. Practical knowledge could be shared during any lunar phase, while more esoteric wisdom required the specific energetic conditions created by particular combinations of lunar position, stellar influences, and seasonal factors. This sophisticated timing system ensured that divine revelations would occur under circumstances that maximized their beneficial effects while minimizing potential risks or misunderstandings. The intricate relationship between Thoth's mastery of lunar cycles and his elevated position as Ra's most trusted advisor emerged from the fundamental cosmic principle that true wisdom required both the illumination of knowledge and the understanding of when that knowledge should be applied. As the moon's phases demonstrated the natural rhythm of revelation and concealment, so too did Thoth's role as the tongue of Ra require him to know not only what divine truths existed, but precisely when and how they should be communicated to maintain universal harmony. The title Tongue of Ra carried profound significance that extended far beyond mere metaphorical description. In Egyptian cosmological understanding, the tongue represented the organ through which divine will transformed from internal thought into external reality. Just as the human tongue shaped breath into articulate speech, Thoth's function as Ra's tongue involved the precise articulation of cosmic intentions into manifestations that could affect all levels of existence. This responsibility required not only comprehensive knowledge of Ra's will, but the linguistic and magical skills necessary to translate divine concepts into forms that could be understood and implemented throughout the universe. Ra's daily journey across the sky created countless situations that required immediate divine decisions and responses, yet the sun god's primary focus on maintaining his solar bark's movement through the heavens left little opportunity for the detailed analysis and careful communication that complex cosmic problems demanded. Thoth's presence as the divine counselor filled this crucial gap, providing Ra with the intellectual resources and communicative abilities necessary to govern the universe effectively, while maintaining the relentless schedule of solar travel that kept the cosmos functioning. The morning consultations between Ra and Thoth took place in the pre-dawn darkness, when the solar bark prepared for its daily emergence from the underworld into the realm of the living. During these crucial moments, Thoth would present Ra with detailed reports on cosmic conditions, potential challenges that might arise during the day's journey, and recommendations for addressing any problems that required divine intervention. The brevity of these consultations demanded that Thoth distill complex cosmic analyses into concise, actionable intelligence that Ra could process quickly without disrupting the precise timing required for sunrise. Thoth's reports covered an extraordinary range of cosmic activities and conditions. His network of informants throughout the divine hierarchy provided him with intelligence on the activities of other gods, the status of various cosmic maintenance projects, and early warnings of potential conflicts or crises that might require Ra's attention. The mortal realm generated its own stream of information, requiring divine consideration, from the prayers and offerings of worshippers to the broader patterns of human behavior that could affect cosmic balance. Natural phenomena, astronomical events, and the complex interactions between different cosmic forces all fell within the scope of Thoth's daily briefings. The challenge of serving as Ra's spokesman required Thoth to master multiple levels of communication simultaneously. Divine pronouncements had to be formulated in language that would carry appropriate authority and clarity when transmitted to other gods, yet the same essential information might need to be conveyed to mortal priests and rulers in forms they could comprehend and implement. The translation of cosmic concepts into human understanding required not just linguistic skill, but deep empathy for the limitations and perspectives of mortal consciousness. The magical techniques that Thoth employed to project Ra's voice across vast cosmic distances involved sophisticated applications of divine power that few other deities could replicate. The sun god's pronouncements had to reach every corner of the universe simultaneously, carrying their full authority and meaning regardless of the distance travelled or the medium through which they passed. Thoth's mastery of both written and spoken magical formulas allowed him to encode Ra's intentions in ways that preserved their essential power while adapting to the diverse conditions they would encounter during transmission. The afternoon conferences that took place as Ra's bark reached its zenith provided opportunities for more detailed discussions of complex cosmic issues that required extended analysis and consultation. During these sessions, Thoth could present comprehensive reports on developing situations, offer multiple strategic options for addressing emerging challenges, and engage in the kind of detailed planning that the morning briefing's time constraints made impossible. The intense solar energy available at noon enhanced both God's intellectual capabilities, allowing for rapid processing of vast amounts of information and the development of sophisticated solutions to multifaceted problems. The evening debriefings occurred as Ra's bark prepared to enter the Underworld, providing crucial opportunities to review the day's events and plan for the challenges that awaited in the realm of the dead. These sessions required Thoth to synthesize information gathered throughout the day's journey, identify patterns and trends that might affect future cosmic stability, and prepare detailed intelligence reports on underworld conditions that would guide Ra's navigation through the dangerous nocturnal realm. The transition from day to night created unique magical conditions that enhanced certain types of divination and analysis, making the evening hours optimal for the most sensitive intelligence work. The nightly journey through the Underworld presented Ra and Thoth with challenges that differed fundamentally from those encountered during the daylight hours. The realm of the dead operated according to different physical and magical laws that required specialized knowledge and techniques to navigate safely. The hostile entities that inhabited the Underworld posed constant threats to the solar bark's progress, while the complex geography of the afterlife realm created navigational challenges that demanded precise knowledge of routes, landmarks, and safe passages. Thoth's role during the Underworld journey expanded beyond advisory functions to encompass active participation in the magical defences and navigation systems that protected Ra's bark from the numerous dangers lurking in the realm of the dead. His mastery of protective spells and his comprehensive knowledge of underworld geography made him an essential crew member whose contributions were crucial for completing the nightly passage successfully. The Ibis god's keen eyesight proved particularly valuable in the Underworld's dim lighting conditions, allowing him to spot obstacles, threats, and navigational landmarks that might escape detection by other members of the divine crew. The recording of deceased souls and their deeds represented one of Thoth's most solemn and important responsibilities during the Underworld journey. As Ra's bark travelled through the various regions of the afterlife realm, Thoth maintained detailed records of every soul encountered, documenting their names, their earthly accomplishments and failures, and their current status in the complex hierarchy of the dead. This documentation served multiple purposes, from maintaining accurate population records of the Underworld to providing the detailed information necessary for the judgment processes that determined each soul's ultimate fate. The cosmic ledger that Thoth maintained during these nightly journeys contained far more than simple census information. Each entry included detailed analyses of how the deceased individual's earthly actions had affected the cosmic balance, assessments of their spiritual development and moral character, and recommendations for the types of afterlife experiences that would best serve both their individual growth and the greatest cosmic good. The complexity of these evaluations required Thoth to apply sophisticated moral and philosophical frameworks that took into account not only the obvious consequences of actions, but also their subtle effects on the intricate web of relationships that connected all existence. The magical implements that Thoth employed for his underworld record-keeping had to function effectively in the unique conditions of the realm of the dead. Standard writing materials proved inadequate for documentation work in an environment where ordinary physical laws operated differently, and where hostile magical forces constantly threatened to corrupt or destroy written records. Thoth's specialized underworld writing kit included reed pens carved from sacred plants that grew only in the afterlife realm, ink formulated from substances that retained their properties regardless of supernatural interference, and papyrus treated with protective spells that prevented tampering or unauthorized access. The process of recording names and deeds required Thoth to employ advanced magical techniques that could extract accurate information from souls who might attempt to conceal or misrepresent their earthly activities. The deceased often arrived in the underworld with incomplete or distorted memories of their mortal lives, while others deliberately attempted to hide shameful actions or exaggerate their virtues. Thoth's ability to perceive truth through divine insight allowed him to see past these deceptions and document the objective reality of each soul's earthly existence. The verification procedures that Thoth employed during the recording process involved cross-referencing information obtained from multiple sources to ensure accuracy and completeness. The cosmic records maintained in his divine library contain detailed accounts of every significant action performed by mortals during their earthly lives, providing a comprehensive database against which claims made by the deceased could be checked. Guardian spirits, divine witnesses, and other supernatural entities who'd observed mortal behavior provided additional sources of information that helped confirm or correct the accounts provided by the souls themselves. The organization of Underworld records required sophisticated filing systems that could accommodate the enormous volume of information generated by the constant flow of deceased souls into the afterlife realm. Thoth's classification methods grouped souls according to multiple criteria, including their moral character, their spiritual development, their earthly accomplishments, and their potential for growth in the afterlife environment. This multi-dimensional organizational system allowed for rapid retrieval of information when needed for judgment proceedings or other administrative purposes. The divine voice that spoke Ra's will into existence operated according to principles that transcended ordinary communication, employing creative power that could literally reshape reality through properly formulated speech. Thoth's mastery of this ultimate form of magical expression required not only perfect understanding of cosmic principles, but also the precise vocal control necessary to channel divine creative force without causing unintended consequences. The slightest mispronunciation or inappropriate emphasis could distort Ra's intentions and create cosmic disruptions that might require extensive corrective action to resolve. The preparation required for channeling Ra's creative voice involved elaborate purification rituals that aligned Thoth's consciousness perfectly with the sun god's intentions. These preparations included meditation practices that synchronized Thoth's mental processes with Ra's cosmic awareness, dietary restrictions that eliminated any substances that might interfere with divine communication, and magical procedures that enhanced his natural vocal abilities to handle the enormous energetic forces involved in creative speech. The preparation process typically began hours before the actual pronouncement, ensuring that every aspect of Thoth's being was optimally configured for the task ahead. The cosmic resonance created by Thoth's pronouncement of Ra's will generated effects that propagated throughout all levels of existence simultaneously. The divine words carried creative force that could instantaneously alter physical laws, modify the behavior of cosmic forces, and influence the consciousness of beings across vast distances. The power of these pronouncements required careful modulation to ensure that their effects remained within intended parameters and did not create cascading changes that might destabilize other aspects of the cosmic order. The witnessing protocols that governed divine pronouncements required the presence of qualified observers who could verify that Thoth's articulation of Ra's will occurred according to proper procedures and achieved the intended results. These divine witnesses included representatives from different aspects of the cosmic hierarchy, each bringing specialized knowledge that contributed to the overall assessment of the pronouncement's effectiveness and appropriateness. The witness testimony became part of the permanent cosmic record, providing documentation that could be referenced in future situations requiring similar divine intervention. The great cosmic battles between order and chaos that periodically threatened universal stability required Thoth's council to develop strategies that could preserve Ma'at without completely destroying the chaotic forces that served essential cosmic functions. These conflicts typically arose when the natural tension between opposing forces became unbalanced, creating situations where either excessive order threatened to stagnate the universe or unchecked chaos risked destroying the fundamental structures that maintained existence. Thoth's role as strategic advisor required him to analyze these complex situations and recommend approaches that could restore balance without eliminating either side entirely. The intelligence gathering that preceded major cosmic conflicts involved Thoth's extensive network of informants and observers throughout all levels of existence. Divine agents, mortal priests, and supernatural entities provided continuous reports on developing situations that might escalate into threats to cosmic stability. The analysis of this intelligence required sophisticated pattern recognition skills that could identify the subtle signs indicating when natural tensions were approaching dangerous thresholds that might trigger major conflicts. The strategic planning sessions that Thoth conducted with Ra and other senior deities involved detailed analysis of potential approaches to cosmic conflicts, including assessment of likely outcomes, resource requirements, and potential unintended consequences of different intervention strategies. These planning sessions drew upon Thoth's comprehensive knowledge of previous cosmic conflicts and their resolutions, allowing the divine leadership to learn from past experiences and avoid repeating mistakes that had proven costly or ineffective in earlier situations. The tactical recommendations that Thoth provided during active cosmic conflicts required real-time analysis of rapidly changing battlefield conditions and the ability to adapt strategic plans to accommodate unexpected developments. His position as Ra's primary advisor placed him at the center of divine decision-making processes, where his council could influence the deployment of cosmic forces and the timing of critical interventions that might determine the outcome of conflicts affecting the entire universe. The circumstances that had established Thoth as Ra's most trusted advisor naturally evolved into his mastery over the fundamental forces of magic itself. His intimate knowledge of creation's blueprints and his role in documenting every cosmic event had given him unparalleled understanding of how supernatural forces operated throughout the universe. This comprehension extended far beyond theoretical knowledge into practical application, making Thoth the supreme architect of magical formulas and the inventor of spells that could manipulate reality at its most basic levels. The development of magical spells required Thoth to understand the precise relationship between spoken words, written symbols, and the cosmic forces they were designed to control. Each spell represented a carefully constructed formula that channeled divine power through specific combinations of sounds, gestures, and written characters. The creation of effective magical formulas demanded mathematical precision comparable to his astronomical calculations, as even minor variations in pronunciation or symbolic representation could dramatically alter a spell's effects or render it completely ineffective. Thoth's magical laboratory existed in a dimension adjacent to his cosmic library, accessible through a doorway marked with hieroglyphs that shifted and changed depending on the type of magical work being conducted within. The laboratory's interior defied conventional spatial limitations, expanding or contracting as needed to accommodate experiments ranging from the creation of simple protective amulets to the development of complex resurrection formulas that could restore life to the dead. The walls were lined with shelves containing ingredients collected from every realm of existence, including substances that existed only during specific astronomical configurations or in the presence of particular divine influences. The tools of magical creation that filled Thoth's laboratory reflected his dual nature as both scholar and practitioner of supernatural arts. Precision instruments for measuring magical energies shared space with cauldrons designed for brewing potions that could alter fundamental aspects of reality. Writing implements crafted from materials found only in the Underworld allowed him to inscribe spells directly onto the fabric of existence itself, while measuring devices calibrated to detect the subtlest variations in cosmic force enabled him to fine-tune magical formulas with unprecedented accuracy. The process of creating new magical spells began with Thoth's analysis of the specific cosmic conditions that needed to be altered or controlled. His comprehensive understanding of universal laws allowed him to identify the precise points where magical intervention could achieve desired results without creating dangerous instabilities in the cosmic order. This preliminary analysis required extensive consultation of his cosmic records to understand how similar magical interventions had affected universal balance in the past, and to identify potential complications that might arise from new applications of supernatural force. The formulation of magical language required Thoth to draw upon his mastery of hieroglyphic writing and his understanding of how different combinations of symbols could focus and direct cosmic energies. Each word in a magical formula carried specific vibrational frequencies that resonated with particular aspects of universal force, while the arrangement of these words created complex harmonic patterns that determined the spell's overall effect. The precision required for this linguistic construction demanded not only perfect understanding of symbolic meaning, but also acute sensitivity to the subtle energetic properties of different sound combinations. The testing procedures that Thoth employed for new magical formulas involved careful experimentation under controlled conditions that minimized the risk of unintended consequences. Initial tests were conducted using minimal amounts of magical energy to verify that the spell's basic structure functioned as intended, with gradual increases in power allowing for assessment of the formula's stability and effectiveness under various conditions. These testing protocols required extensive documentation to track how different variables affected spell performance and to identify optimal conditions for each magical application. The creation of protective spells represented one of Thoth's most important magical specializations, as these formulas served essential functions in maintaining cosmic security and defending against supernatural threats. Protective magic required sophisticated understanding of how hostile forces operated and how defensive barriers could be constructed to neutralize specific types of attacks without interfering with beneficial cosmic processes. The development of these spells drew upon Thoth's extensive experience documenting cosmic conflicts and his detailed knowledge of the various supernatural entities that posed threats to universal stability. The architectural principles that governed protective spell construction involved creating multi-layered defensive systems that could adapt to different types of supernatural assault. The outermost layers of protection were designed to detect and deflect minor threats automatically, while inner defensive mechanisms required increasingly sophisticated magical responses to penetrate. This layered approach ensured that protective spells could handle routine supernatural harassment without depleting their energy reserves, while maintaining sufficient power to repel serious magical attacks that might threaten their protected subjects. The materials required for creating protective amulets had to be gathered from sources that possessed inherent defensive properties or could be magically enhanced to provide specific types of protection. Thoth's knowledge of cosmic geography allowed him to identify locations where natural magical forces had concentrated protective energies, while his understanding of divine symbolism enabled him to select materials whose symbolic associations would enhance the amulet's effectiveness. The preparation of these materials involved complex purification rituals that removed any contaminating influences while strengthening their natural protective qualities. The inscription of protective formulas onto amulet surfaces required specialized techniques that could bind magical energy permanently into physical objects without degrading their effectiveness over time. Thoth developed unique methods for etching hieroglyphic spells into various materials, using tools crafted from substances that could channel divine power directly into the inscription process. The resulting amulets carried protective formulas that remained active indefinitely, providing continuous defense against supernatural threats without requiring periodic renewal or maintenance. The legendary magical contests that established Thoth's reputation as the supreme master of supernatural forces arose from challenges issued by other deities who questioned his claim to ultimate magical authority. These contests took various forms, from direct competitions involving the casting of opposing spells to complex magical puzzles that required innovative solutions, drawing upon comprehensive understanding of cosmic principles. The outcomes of these contests not only demonstrated Thoth's superior magical abilities, but also established precedents for how magical disputes should be resolved, and how magical knowledge should be shared among the divine hierarchy. The contest with Isis, the goddess renowned for her own formidable magical abilities, took place in a specially constructed arena where the two deities could demonstrate their powers without risking damage to the surrounding cosmic infrastructure. The competition involved a series of increasingly complex magical challenges designed to test every aspect of supernatural knowledge and ability. Isis's specialization in healing and transformation magic provided her with formidable capabilities, but Thoth's broader understanding of cosmic principles and his superior knowledge of magical theory ultimately gave him the decisive advantage. The opening challenge required both deities to demonstrate their mastery of elemental magic by manipulating the fundamental forces of fire, water, earth, and air. Isis began with an impressive display of her ability to control water, creating complex patterns of flowing liquid that defied gravity and formed intricate geometric shapes in mid-air. Her manipulation of fire followed, producing flames that burned in impossible colours and generated heat that could be precisely controlled to warm or incinerate as desired. Thoth's response demonstrated not only equivalent control over individual elements, but superior understanding of how different elemental forces could be combined to create entirely new types of magical effects. The second phase of the contest involved healing magic, an area where Isis's reputation for excellence made her the clear favourite. She demonstrated her ability to restore life to plants that had been reduced to ash, to mend broken bones instantly, and to cure diseases that had been specifically designed to resist magical treatment. Thoth's approach to the healing challenges revealed his deeper understanding of the fundamental principles underlying injury and illness, allowing him to develop healing techniques that not only restored immediate damage, but also strengthened the subject's natural defences against future harm. The transformation challenges that followed tested both deities' abilities to alter the fundamental nature of objects and beings through magical manipulation. Isis displayed her mastery of shape-changing magic by transforming herself into various animal forms while retaining her divine consciousness and abilities. Her transformations of inanimate objects demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how magical energy could restructure matter at the molecular level. Thoth's transformative magic revealed his superior grasp of the mathematical principles underlying all physical existence, allowing him to perform transformations that were not only more dramatic than Isis's efforts, but also more stable and permanent. The final challenge involved the creation of entirely new forms of life through pure magical manipulation. Isis used her powers to generate creatures that combined characteristics from multiple existing species, producing beings that were both beautiful and functional despite their hybrid nature. Thoth's creations transcended the limitations of combining existing life forms, instead drawing upon his understanding of the fundamental principles of consciousness and vitality to generate entirely new types of beings that possess capabilities beyond anything that existed in the natural world. The contest with Set presented different challenges, as the god of chaos and destruction possessed magical abilities that operated according to principles fundamentally opposed to the ordered approach that characterized Thoth's magical practice. Set's chaotic magic derived its power from unpredictability and destruction, making it difficult to counter using conventional magical defenses that relied on structured, systematic approaches. The contest required Thoth to develop innovative magical techniques that could impose order on chaotic forces without simply overpowering them through superior magical energy. Set's opening magical display involved the summoning of a massive sandstorm that threatened to engulf the entire contest arena and scatter the assembled divine witnesses across multiple dimensions. The storm's chaotic nature made it impossible to predict its movements or to defend against it using conventional protective barriers. Thoth's response demonstrated his ability to find patterns within apparent chaos, using his mathematical understanding to identify the underlying structures that governed even Set's most random magical manifestations. By recognizing these hidden patterns, Thoth was able to create counterspells that worked with rather than against the chaotic forces, gradually bringing the sandstorm under control and dissipating its destructive energy. The destruction challenges that followed required both deities to demonstrate their ability to unmake existing structures and return them to their component elements. Set's approach involved raw destructive force that could reduce complex objects to their basic components almost instantaneously. His magic operated through the application of entropy and decay, accelerating natural processes of breakdown and dissolution until even the most durable materials crumbled into dust. Thoth's destructive magic revealed his superior understanding of structural principles, allowing him to identify the critical points where minimal magical intervention could cause complete structural collapse with far less energy expenditure than Set's brute force approach. The creation challenges presented Set with significant difficulties, as his chaotic nature made it nearly impossible for him to maintain the sustained focus and systematic approach required for building complex magical structures. His attempts at creative magic produced unstable, short-lived constructions that collapsed under their own contradictions within moments of completion. Thoth's creative demonstrations showcased not only his ability to build stable, permanent magical structures, but also his capacity to incorporate elements of controlled chaos that enhanced rather than threatened their overall stability. The development of funerary magic represented one of Thoth's most significant contributions to both divine and mortal civilization, as these spells provided the supernatural tools necessary for navigating the complex transition from life to death and ensuring successful passage through the various challenges of the afterlife journey. The creation of effective funerary magic required comprehensive understanding of both the physical processes of death and the spiritual mechanics of consciousness transferred between different planes of existence. The analysis of death as a magical process revealed to Thoth that the transition from life to death involved the systematic disconnection of consciousness from a physical form according to predictable patterns that could be influenced through appropriate magical intervention. The timing and manner of these disconnections determined whether the dying individual would experience a smooth transition to the afterlife, or would become trapped in intermediate states that could prevent successful completion of the death process. The development of magical formulas to facilitate proper death transitions required detailed study of consciousness mechanics and extensive experimentation to identify the most effective intervention techniques. The preservation of consciousness during the death transition required specialized spells that could maintain the integrity of individual identity, while allowing for the fundamental changes in existence mode that death necessarily involved. These preservation spells had to account for the different aspects of human consciousness, including memory, personality, spiritual development, and karmic obligations, ensuring that all essential elements of individual identity survived the transition intact. The complexity of consciousness preservation magic demanded sophisticated understanding of how different aspects of identity related to each other, and how they could be protected during the traumatic process of physical dissolution. The navigation spells that Thoth developed for the afterlife journey provided deceased souls with the magical tools necessary to traverse the complex geography of the Underworld and to overcome the various obstacles and challenges they would encounter during their passage to final judgment. These spells included protective formulas that could defend against hostile entities, guidance magic that could reveal safe paths through dangerous terrain, and communication techniques that allowed the dead to interact effectively with the various supernatural beings they would meet during their journey. The judgment preparation spells represented perhaps the most crucial aspect of funerary magic, as these formulas help prepare deceased souls for the complex evaluation process that would determine their ultimate afterlife destiny. The preparation involved magical techniques for organizing and presenting the soul's earthly experiences in ways that would facilitate accurate assessment by the divine judges, while also providing protection against the various supernatural influences that might attempt to distort or manipulate the judgment process. The legendary restoration of dismembered bodies through Thoth's magical intervention established him as the supreme master of reconstructive magic and demonstrated his ability to reverse even the most severe forms of physical destruction. The techniques he developed for this ultimate form of healing magic required understanding of how consciousness related to physical form, and how the essential patterns that defined individual identity could be preserved and restored even after complete physical dissolution. The magical restoration of Osiris following his dismemberment by Set represented the most complex and challenging application of reconstructive magic ever attempted. The scattered pieces of Osiris's divine body had been hidden across Egypt in locations specifically chosen to make recovery difficult and to expose the remains to corrupting influences that would complicate the restoration process. The magical techniques required for successful restoration had to account not only for the physical reconstruction of the dismembered body, but also for the spiritual healing necessary to restore Osiris's divine consciousness and supernatural abilities. The collection of Osiris's scattered remains required Thoth to develop specialized location spells that could detect divine essence even when it had been concealed by powerful magical barriers. These detection techniques had to distinguish between genuine divine remains and false traces planted by Set to mislead the restoration effort. The magical analysis of each recovered piece required comprehensive evaluation to determine its condition, to identify any corrupting influences that needed to be removed, and to assess how it would interact with other components during the reconstruction process. The purification procedures that preceded the actual reconstruction involved complex magical rituals designed to remove all traces of the corrupting influences that had affected Osiris's remains during their scattered state. These purification techniques had to be carefully calibrated to eliminate harmful contamination without damaging the essential divine essence that made reconstruction possible. The process required rare magical ingredients and specialized techniques that drew upon Thoth's comprehensive knowledge of both divine anatomy and the supernatural forces that governed life and death. The reconstruction process itself involved the precise magical reassembly of Osiris's divine form according to the original patterns that had defined his physical existence before dismemberment. This reconstruction required not only accurate knowledge of divine anatomy, but also understanding of how different body parts related to specific aspects of consciousness and supernatural ability. The magical techniques used for reassembly had to ensure that all connections between physical form and divine essence were properly restored, allowing Osiris to regain full access to his supernatural powers and cosmic responsibilities. The restoration of consciousness to the reconstructed body represented the most delicate and dangerous aspect of the entire process, as improper techniques could result in the creation of a mindless divine automaton rather than the restoration of Osiris's complete divine nature. The consciousness restoration required magical formulas that could reintegrate the various aspects of Osiris's identity that had been scattered along with his physical remains, ensuring that memory, personality, wisdom, and spiritual development were all properly restored to their original configuration. The protective spells that Thoth wove around the restoration process prevented interference from hostile forces that might attempt to sabotage the complex magical work or to corrupt the restored Osiris for their own purposes. These protective measures had to account for various types of potential interference, from direct magical attacks to subtle influences that might distort the restoration process in ways that would only become apparent after the work was completed. The maintenance of these protective barriers required constant vigilance and periodic reinforcement throughout the extended period required for complete restoration. The success of Osiris's restoration established precedents and techniques that would influence all subsequent applications of reconstructive magic. The detailed documentation that Thoth maintained throughout the process provided future practitioners with comprehensive guidance for attempting similar magical interventions, while also serving as a permanent record of the techniques and principles that govern the ultimate form of healing magic. The magical formulas developed during Osiris's restoration became the foundation for the funerary texts that would guide deceased souls through their own resurrection processes in the afterlife. The mastery of magical formulas that had established Thoth as the supreme architect of supernatural forces naturally culminated in his most solemn and consequential responsibility, presiding over the judgment of deceased souls in the afterlife. This cosmic duty required him to apply all his accumulated wisdom, his perfect understanding of divine law, and his uncompromising commitment to truth in determining the eternal fate of every consciousness that passed from mortal existence into the realm of the dead. The judgment process represented the ultimate test of Thoth's abilities as both scholar and judge, as each decision carried consequences that would resonate throughout eternity. The Hall of Two Truths, where these momentous proceedings took place, existed in a dimension carefully constructed to facilitate the most accurate possible evaluation of moral worth and spiritual development. Thoth had personally overseen the hall's design and construction, ensuring that every architectural element served to enhance the judgment process, while preventing any external influences from corrupting the proceedings. The chamber's walls were inscribed with hieroglyphic formulas that created a zone of absolute truth where deception became impossible, and where the essential nature of each soul would be revealed without distortion or concealment. The great scales that dominated the centre of the hall represented one of Thoth's most sophisticated magical creations, designed to measure not just the weight of physical objects, but the moral and spiritual density of human actions and intentions. The construction of these scales required materials gathered from every realm of existence, including metals that existed only in the Underworld, crystals formed in the heart of dying stars, and woods from trees that grew in the gardens of the gods. The balancing mechanism operated according to principles that transcended ordinary physics, responding to the fundamental forces that governed moral causation and spiritual development. The feather of Ma'at that served as the standard of measurement represented the perfect equilibrium that characterized cosmic justice and universal order. This sacred feather possessed properties that made it the ideal counterweight for human hearts, as its ethereal substance could interact with the spiritual essence of deceased souls while remaining completely immune to any attempts at manipulation or corruption. The feather's placement on the scales created a reference point of absolute moral purity against which the accumulated actions and intentions of mortal lives could be accurately measured. Thoth's preparation for each judgment session involved extensive consultation of his cosmic records to review the complete earthly history of the soul under evaluation. These preparatory investigations required him to analyze thousands of individual actions, decisions and thoughts that had shaped the deceased person's moral character and spiritual development. The complexity of human motivation and the subtle interconnections between different life experiences demanded that Thoth consider not only the obvious consequences of major decisions, but also the cumulative effects of countless small choices that had gradually shaped the soul's essential nature. The documentation process that preceded each judgment required Thoth to create comprehensive dossiers that captured the full complexity of individual human lives in forms that could be quickly referenced during the judgment proceedings. These dossiers included detailed analyses of the deceased person's relationships with family, friends, and community members, assessments of their professional conduct and social responsibilities, and evaluations of their spiritual practices and moral development. The preparation of these documents demanded not only thorough investigation, but also sophisticated analytical frameworks that could identify the underlying patterns and motivations that had driven individual behaviour. The verification procedures that Thoth employed to ensure the accuracy of his pre-judgment investigations involved cross-referencing information obtained from multiple supernatural sources. Guardian spirits who had observed the deceased person's earthly life provided detailed testimony about private actions and hidden motivations that might not be apparent from external behaviour alone. Divine witnesses who had monitored significant life events offered perspectives that helped clarify the true nature of complex moral situations, where conventional ethical analysis might prove inadequate. The magical instruments that Thoth used during the judgment process had been specifically designed to penetrate the various forms of self-deception and rationalization that souls often employ to justify their earthly actions. These devices could detect discrepancies between what deceased individuals claimed about their motivations and what their actual intentions had been during crucial life decisions. The instruments operated through sophisticated applications of truth magic that made it impossible for souls to misrepresent their earthly conduct or to conceal actions that might affect their judgment outcomes. The arrival of each soul in the Hall of Two Truths marked the beginning of a process that would unfold according to procedures that Thoth had refined through countless previous judgments. The deceased individual would first undergo preliminary questioning designed to assess their understanding of their earthly life and their readiness to accept responsibility for their actions. This initial evaluation helped Thoth determine the appropriate approach for conducting the more detailed investigation that would follow, as different types of souls required different questioning techniques to elicit accurate and complete information. The confession process that preceded the actual weighing required deceased souls to provide detailed accounts of their earthly conduct, including both their proudest achievements and their most shameful failures. Thoth's role during these confessions involved careful listening and precise questioning designed to reveal not only what actions had been performed, but also the motivations and circumstances that had influenced individual decisions. The magical atmosphere of the Hall of Two Truths made it impossible for souls to lie or to omit significant information, ensuring that the confessions provided complete and accurate foundations for the judgment process. The negative confession, where souls were required to deny having committed specific categories of sins and moral failures, represented one of the most challenging aspects of the judgment process. The list of transgressions that souls had to disavow included not only obvious crimes like murder and theft, but also subtle moral failures like pride, jealousy, and the neglect of social responsibilities. Thoth's monitoring of these denials required sophisticated magical techniques that could detect even the slightest hesitation or uncertainty that might indicate incomplete honesty about past conduct. The preparation of the heart for weighing involved magical procedures designed to reveal the true moral weight that the soul had accumulated through earthly actions and decisions. These procedures stripped away all the rationalizations, excuses and self-justifications that might obscure the essential moral character that had been shaped through a lifetime of choices. The magical exposure of the heart's true weight required delicate techniques that could distinguish between genuine moral development and superficial conformity to social expectations that had not been internalized as authentic ethical commitment. The actual moment of weighing represented the culmination of all Thoth's preparatory work and investigation, as the scales would provide an objective measurement that could not be influenced by appeals, arguments, or supernatural intervention. The placement of the deceased person's heart on one side of the scales created a moment of absolute vulnerability. where the accumulated moral weight of an entire lifetime would be revealed without possibility of concealment or misrepresentation. Thoth's observation of the weighing process required complete focus and attention, as he had to monitor not only the scales' behaviour, but also the various supernatural forces that might attempt to influence the outcome. The mathematical precision that governed the weighing process reflected Thoth's fundamental nature as a deity, who brought order to chaos through careful measurement and calculation. The scales operated according to principles that could detect even the most minute differences in moral weight, ensuring that the judgment would reflect the true balance between positive and negative actions, rather than relying on rough approximations that might produce unjust outcomes. The sensitivity of the weighing mechanism meant that every action, thought, and intention that had shaped the deceased person's moral character would contribute to the final measurement. The recording of judgment results required Thoth to document not only the outcome of the weighing process, but also the detailed reasoning that had led to each decision. These records served multiple purposes, from providing precedents that could guide future similar cases to creating permanent documentation that would justify the judgment if it were ever questioned by higher divine authorities. The complexity of moral evaluation meant that similar actions could produce different judgment outcomes depending on the circumstances and motivations involved, making detailed documentation essential for maintaining consistency and fairness in the judgment process. The interaction between Thoth and Ammit the Devourer during failed judgments represented one of the most solemn and terrible aspects of the afterlife proceedings. Ammit, whose fearsome form combined the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, served as the cosmic executioner whose function was to completely destroy souls whose hearts proved heavier than the feather of Ma'at. The creature's presence in the Hall of Two Truths created an atmosphere of ultimate accountability, where the stakes of moral failure could not be minimized or ignored. The protocols that governed Ammit's actions during failed judgments had been carefully established by Thoth to ensure that the destruction of condemned souls would be carried out swiftly and completely, preventing any possibility that partially destroyed consciousness might survive to cause problems in the afterlife realm. The procedures required Thoth to formally announce the judgment results and to provide Ammit with specific authorization before the devouring could proceed. This authorization process served as a final safeguard against errors or hasty decisions that might result in the unjust destruction of souls who deserved different treatment. The magical constraints that Thoth had placed on Ammit's activities ensured that the creature could only act within the strict parameters defined by cosmic law and divine justice. These constraints prevented Ammit from attacking souls who had not been formally condemned through proper judgment procedures, while also ensuring that the devouring process would be completed thoroughly enough to prevent any remnants of destroyed consciousness from persisting in the afterlife realm. The maintenance of these magical controls required constant vigilance from Thoth, as Ammit's nature as a force of cosmic destruction created inherent tendencies toward excessive action that had to be carefully managed. The documentation of soul destruction cases required Thoth to maintain detailed records of why specific individuals had failed the judgment process, and what particular actions or character flaws had made redemption impossible. These records served as cautionary examples that could be shared with living mortals through prophetic dreams and divine visions, helping to guide human behaviour away from the paths that led to ultimate spiritual destruction. The analysis of destruction patterns also helped Thoth identify emerging trends in human moral failure that might require adjustments to divine guidance or intervention in mortal affairs. The successful judgments that resulted in souls being admitted to the blessed afterlife required Thoth to coordinate with Osiris and other underworld deities to ensure that newly admitted souls would be properly integrated into the complex society of the dead. The transition from judgment to afterlife residence involved multiple administrative procedures that had to be completed accurately to prevent confusion or conflicts that might disrupt the peaceful order of the underworld realm. Thoth's role in these transition procedures required him to serve simultaneously as judge, administrator, and counselor for souls who were experiencing the profound adjustment from mortal to immortal existence. The assignment of afterlife roles and responsibilities to successfully judge souls required Thoth to evaluate not only their moral worthiness, but also their particular skills, interests, and spiritual development that would determine how they could best contribute to the underworld community. Some souls were suited for scholarly pursuits in the cosmic libraries, while others were better equipped for service roles that supported the ongoing operations of the afterlife realm. The matching of individual capabilities with appropriate afterlife positions required sophisticated understanding of both human psychology and the complex organizational needs of the underworld society. The ongoing monitoring of souls who had passed judgment successfully represented a continuing responsibility that extended Thoth's influence throughout the entire afterlife experience. The cosmic records that he maintained tracked the progress and development of every soul in the underworld, documenting their achievements, challenges, and growth as they adapted to their new existence. This monitoring system served both administrative and protective functions, ensuring that souls received appropriate support and guidance, while also detecting any problems that might require intervention or adjustment. The appeals process that Thoth had established for souls who felt their judgments had been unfair or inaccurate provided a mechanism for correcting errors while maintaining the integrity of the overall judgment system. These appeals were rare and required substantial evidence of procedural irregularities or the discovery of new information that had not been available during the original judgment. The review procedures for appeals demanded even more thorough investigation than initial judgments, as Thoth had to verify not only the accuracy of the original decision, but also the validity of the new evidence or arguments presented by the appealing soul. The cosmic balance that Thoth maintained through his judgment activities extended far beyond the immediate effects on individual souls to encompass the broader relationship between the realm of the living and the domain of the dead. The accurate evaluation of souls and their appropriate placement in afterlife roles helped maintain the spiritual equilibrium that prevented either realm from becoming overwhelmed by inappropriate spiritual energies. The judgment process served as a filtering mechanism that ensured the underworld would be populated by souls whose presence would contribute to rather than disrupt the cosmic order. The influence of judgment outcomes on the living world operated through complex mechanisms that connected the moral development of deceased souls with the spiritual conditions experienced by their surviving family members and communities. Souls who achieved successful judgment outcomes could serve as protective spiritual influences for their earthly descendants, while the destruction of condemned souls often created spiritual voids that left their former communities vulnerable to negative influences. Thoth's documentation of these connections helped divine authorities understand how afterlife events affected mortal affairs, and when intervention might be necessary to prevent spiritual problems from cascading between realms. The training programs that Thoth had established for lesser deities and supernatural beings who assisted with judgment procedures ensured that the complex evaluation process could be conducted efficiently while maintaining the higher standards of accuracy and fairness. These training programs covered not only the technical procedures involved in soul evaluation, but also the philosophical and ethical frameworks that guided judgment decisions. The ongoing education of judgment assistants required regular updates as new types of moral challenges emerged in the evolving human societies that generated the souls requiring evaluation. The statistical analysis that Thoth conducted on judgment outcomes provided valuable insights into patterns of human moral development and the effectiveness of different divine guidance strategies. The data revealed trends in the types of moral failures that led to soul destruction, the character traits that most strongly predicted successful judgment outcomes, and the life experiences that seemed to promote spiritual growth and ethical development. This analytical work informed divine policy decisions about how best to guide human moral development, and when direct intervention in mortal affairs might be necessary to prevent widespread spiritual disaster. The profound responsibilities that Thoth had accumulated through his role as judge of souls and keeper of cosmic records inevitably brought him into direct conflict with the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to undermine the universal order he worked so tirelessly to maintain. Among all the chaotic entities that challenged Ma'at, none proved more persistent or dangerous than Set, the red-haired god whose dominion over storms, violence, and the untamed desert made him the natural antithesis to everything Thoth represented. Their rivalry transcended personal animosity to become a fundamental cosmic struggle between the principles of ordered knowledge and destructive chaos that would shape the very nature of divine governance. Set's resentment toward Thoth had been building for millennia, rooted in the intellectual god's consistent ability to outmaneuver him through superior planning and strategic thinking. Where Set relied on raw power and unpredictable violence to achieve his goals, Thoth employed careful analysis, mathematical precision, and comprehensive knowledge to counter every chaotic scheme. This fundamental difference in approach meant that their conflicts often resembled elaborate chess matches played on the cosmic scale, with Set making bold, aggressive moves that Thoth would systematically neutralize through patient, methodical responses that revealed the deeper patterns underlying apparent chaos. The rivalry intensified dramatically when Isis became pregnant with Horus, as Set recognized that the birth of Osiris's heir would permanently solidify the divine succession that excluded him from ultimate power. Set's supernatural senses could detect the growing divine presence within Isis's womb, and his rage at this development drove him to unprecedented levels of violent planning. The protection of Isis during her pregnancy became one of Thoth's most challenging assignments, requiring him to develop new forms of concealment magic while simultaneously preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Set's forces. Thoth's initial protective strategy involved creating a network of safe houses throughout Egypt, where Isis could hide during different stages of her pregnancy. These sanctuaries were constructed using architectural principles that Thoth had derived from his study of cosmic geometry, with each building designed to channel protective energies while remaining invisible to supernatural detection. The locations were chosen according to complex calculations that took into account ley line intersections, astronomical alignments, and the natural magical properties of different geographical features that could enhance the concealment spells. The magical barriers that Thoth erected around each sanctuary required continuous maintenance and adjustment as Set's searching techniques became increasingly sophisticated. The Chaos God employed various supernatural agents to scan Egypt for traces of divine pregnancy, forcing Thoth to develop counter-detection spells that could mask not only Isis's presence, but also the distinctive magical signatures created by her unborn child. These concealment techniques required Thoth to study the fundamental nature of divine essence and develop methods for temporarily suppressing its natural radiance without harming either mother or child. Set's first major assault on Thoth's protective network came in the form of a coordinated attack by supernatural creatures that had been specifically bred for tracking divine essence. These beings possessed enhanced senses that could detect the subtle energy fluctuations created by divine pregnancy, making them ideal tools for penetrating Thoth's concealment spells. The creatures attacked multiple safe houses simultaneously, forcing Thoth to divide his attention among several locations while maintaining the complex magical defenses that protected Isis's current hiding place. The battle against Set's tracking creatures required Thoth to employ combat magic techniques that he had developed specifically for dealing with supernatural entities whose chaotic nature made them resistant to conventional magical attacks. His approach involved using their own chaotic energy against them, creating magical feedback loops that amplified their natural instability until they literally tore themselves apart. The technique required precise timing and mathematical calculation to ensure that the feedback effects would destroy the creatures without creating dangerous magical explosions that might reveal Isis's location. The success of Thoth's defensive measures prompted Set to escalate his efforts by recruiting mortal agents who could search for Isis without triggering the supernatural detection systems that Thoth had established. These human servants possessed no inherent magical abilities that would alert Thoth's monitoring network, but their knowledge of local geography and social networks made them effective at identifying locations where a disguised goddess might attempt to hide. The counterintelligence operations that Thoth mounted against these mortal agents required him to work through intermediaries and magical influences rather than direct intervention that might compromise his primary mission. The magical duels that erupted between Thoth and Set during this period represented some of the most sophisticated supernatural combat ever witnessed in the cosmic realm. These confrontations typically began when Set's searching efforts brought him close enough to one of Isis's hiding places to trigger the automatic defensive systems that Thoth had established. The resulting magical exchanges involved rapid-fire casting of offensive and defensive spells, with each combatant attempting to overwhelm the other through superior technique and more efficient use of supernatural energy. Set's combat magic drew its power from the fundamental forces of entropy and destruction, allowing him to generate attacks that could unmake the basic structures that held reality together. His preferred techniques involve creating zones of pure chaos where normal magical laws cease to function, forcing his opponents to fight according to constantly shifting rules that favoured his naturally chaotic approach to supernatural combat. The unpredictability of these chaos zones made them extremely dangerous for any deity whose magic relied on systematic principles and consistent natural laws. Thoth's response to Set's chaos magic required him to develop new theoretical frameworks that could function effectively in environments where traditional magical principles had been suspended or reversed. His approach involved identifying the mathematical constants that remained stable even within chaos zones, then using these invariant principles as foundations for spells that could operate regardless of local magical conditions. The development of these chaos-resistant magical techniques represented a major breakthrough in supernatural theory that would influence magical practice for millennia to come. The contest of wits that accompanied their magical duels often proved more decisive than the direct supernatural combat, as both deities recognized that ultimate victory would depend on superior strategy rather than raw magical power. Set would attempt to lure Thoth into tactical situations that favoured chaotic approaches, while Thoth worked to impose structured frameworks that would allow his systematic thinking to dominate the confrontation. These intellectual battles required both combatants to think several moves ahead while simultaneously managing the immediate demands of magical combat. The protection of sacred knowledge became another major battleground in their ongoing rivalry, as Set recognised that Thoth's vast libraries contained information that could be used to enhance chaotic magic, or to develop new techniques for disrupting cosmic order. Set's attempts to infiltrate Thoth's repositories required sophisticated deception magic that could fool the elaborate security systems protecting the most sensitive documents. The magical locks that Thoth had placed on his most dangerous texts responded not only to unauthorized access attempts, but also to the presence of chaotic intent, making them extremely difficult for Set to circumvent. The theft attempts that Set mounted against Thoth's libraries involved carefully planned operations that required months of preparation and the coordination of multiple supernatural agents with specialized skills. Set's operatives included shapeshifters who could assume the forms of authorized library users, mind readers who could extract access codes from legitimate scholars, and reality manipulators who could temporarily alter the physical laws governing the library's security systems. The complexity of these operations demonstrated Set's growing sophistication in planning and executing systematic campaigns Rather than relying solely on spontaneous violence, Thoth's counterintelligence measures against Set's infiltration attempts required him to develop new forms of security magic that could detect chaotic intent, regardless of how well it was concealed. These detection systems operated by analysing the fundamental mathematical patterns that characterise different types of consciousness, identifying the distinctive irregularities that marked minds influenced by chaotic forces. The implementation of these psychological screening techniques required Thoth to study the basic nature of consciousness itself and develop theoretical models that could distinguish between legitimate scholarly curiosity and malicious intent. The magical traps that Thoth embedded in his most sensitive documents created additional layers of protection that activated when unauthorized readers attempted to access forbidden knowledge. These traps were designed to respond proportionally to the threat level represented by different types of intrusion, ranging from mild confusion spells that would discourage casual browsers to devastating curses that could permanently damage the consciousness of serious threats to cosmic security. The calibration of these protective measures required sophisticated assessment of reader intent and potential danger levels. The battle for control over the fundamental forces of creation and destruction escalated when Set began developing new forms of chaos magic that could permanently alter the basic laws governing reality. These techniques threatened to destabilize the cosmic order at such a fundamental level that even successful resistance might not prevent catastrophic damage to universal structure. The detection and analysis of Set's reality alteration experiments required Thoth to expand his monitoring capabilities to encompass the deepest levels of cosmic foundation, where the basic principles that governed existence were encoded in mathematical relationships that few deities could perceive or understand. The development of countermeasures against Set's reality alteration magic required Thoth to create new forms of stabilization spells that could reinforce the fundamental laws of existence without interfering with the natural flexibility that allowed the universe to evolve and grow. These stabilization techniques had to distinguish between legitimate cosmic development and destructive chaos that threatened universal survival, requiring sophisticated analysis of change patterns and their long-term consequences. The mathematical models that Thoth developed for this analysis became the foundation for cosmic engineering techniques that would be essential for maintaining universal stability. The strategic alliances that Thoth forged with other deities during his conflict with Set required careful diplomatic work to coordinate different divine approaches to chaos management. Each deity brought unique capabilities and perspectives that could contribute to the overall effort, but their different personalities and priorities created coordination challenges that required Thoth's skills as a mediator and administrator. The alliance agreements that he negotiated had to balance the need for effective cooperation with respect for each deity's individual autonomy and areas of expertise. The intelligence networks that Thoth established to monitor Set's activities required the cooperation of supernatural beings throughout all levels of cosmic hierarchy, from minor nature spirits who could observe local conditions to major deities who had access to high-level strategic information. The management of these intelligence assets required sophisticated communication systems that could transmit sensitive information securely across vast cosmic distances while preventing interception by Set's counterintelligence operations. The encryption techniques that Thoth developed for these communications drew upon mathematical principles so advanced that only deities with comparable intellectual capabilities could decode the transmitted messages. The preparation of Horus for his eventual confrontation with Set required Thoth to serve as both military advisor and educational mentor, providing the young god with the knowledge and skills necessary to defeat his father's murderer. This educational program had to be carefully designed to develop Horus's natural abilities while avoiding the psychological damage that premature exposure to Set's chaotic influence might cause. The training regimen that Thoth created combined practical combat instruction with theoretical education about the nature of chaos and the principles that governed cosmic conflict. The magical weapons and protective equipment that Thoth created for Horus represented some of his most sophisticated applications of supernatural craftsmanship, combining advanced metallurgy with complex enchantment techniques that could enhance the young god's natural abilities. The weapons had to be powerful enough to penetrate Set's chaotic defences while remaining controllable enough that Horus could wield them effectively without being overwhelmed by their supernatural properties. The protective equipment required similar balancing of power and usability, providing maximum defense against Set's attacks while allowing Horus to maintain the mobility and flexibility necessary for effective combat. The psychological preparation that Horus required for confronting Set involved helping the young god understand and master the emotional challenges that would arise during their conflict. Set's chaotic nature made him particularly skilled at exploiting psychological weaknesses and emotional vulnerabilities, using his opponent's feelings against them in ways that could be more devastating than direct magical attacks. Thoth's counselling sessions with Horus focused on developing emotional stability and mental discipline that would make the young god resistant to Set's psychological warfare techniques. The final confrontation between Set and the forces of order represented the culmination of Thoth's long campaign to protect cosmic stability against the ultimate threat of destructive chaos. The battle required coordination of multiple divine forces and careful timing to ensure that Set's defeat would be decisive without causing collateral damage that might destabilize other aspects of cosmic order. Thoth's role as strategic coordinator required him to manage battlefield communications, coordinate magical support operations, and provide real-time tactical analysis that could guide the Allied forces' responses to Set's constantly changing battle strategies. The documentation of Set's defeat and the establishment of new cosmic security measures represented the final phase of Thoth's campaign against chaos, ensuring that the lessons learned from this conflict would be preserved for future reference and that adequate safeguards would be established to prevent similar threats from emerging. The comprehensive records that Thoth maintained throughout the conflict provided detailed analysis of chaos magic techniques, effective countermeasures, and strategic principles that would guide future responses to threats against cosmic order. The institutional changes that resulted from this conflict established new protocols for detecting and responding to chaotic influences that would become permanent features of divine governance. The triumph over Set's chaotic forces had demonstrated Thoth's mastery over the destructive elements that threatened cosmic stability. But this victory also revealed the urgent need for a more systematic approach to preserving and transmitting divine knowledge. The scattered conflicts and reactive measures that had characterized the struggle against chaos made it clear that the forces of order required institutional foundations that could maintain cosmic stability through organized education rather than constant warfare. Thoth recognized that the ultimate defense against chaos lay not in superior magical power, but in the establishment of mystery schools that could cultivate wisdom and understanding among both divine and mortal practitioners. The conception of the first mystery school emerged from Thoth's analysis of how chaotic influences had repeatedly managed to infiltrate divine society, despite the existence of powerful protective measures. His investigation revealed that the primary vulnerability lay in the ad hoc nature of divine education, where individual deities acquired knowledge through personal experience and informal mentorship rather than systematic instruction in cosmic principles. This haphazard approach left dangerous gaps in understanding that chaos could exploit, while also failing to develop the comprehensive wisdom necessary for effective cosmic governance. The location chosen for the first mystery school required careful consideration of multiple factors that would influence both the quality of education and the security of the knowledge being transmitted. Thoth selected a site where powerful ley lines intersected beneath a natural amphitheatre formed by ancient geological processes, creating conditions that would naturally enhance both learning and magical practice. The geographical features included underground chambers that could serve as secure repositories for the most sensitive teachings, while the elevated position provided clear views of celestial phenomena that would be essential for astronomical instruction. The architectural design of the Mystery School reflected Thoth's understanding of how physical environment could influence intellectual and spiritual development. The main teaching halls were constructed using proportions derived from his mathematical analysis of cosmic harmony, with acoustic properties that would enhance the transmission of spoken wisdom while preventing unauthorized eavesdropping. The arrangement of buildings followed patterns that mirrored the structure of divine hierarchy, creating a physical representation of cosmic order that would reinforce the theoretical teachings through direct environmental experience. The curriculum development for the Mystery School required Thoth to organize the vast scope of divine knowledge into systematic programs that could guide students through progressive levels of understanding. The foundational courses covered basic principles of cosmic law, mathematical relationships that governed natural phenomena, and the fundamental techniques of written communication that would be necessary for advanced study. Intermediate instruction introduced students to the practical applications of divine principles in magical practice, astronomical observation, and the maintenance of social order that reflected cosmic harmony. The advanced curriculum reserved for the most promising students included instruction in the deepest mysteries of creation, the mathematical formulas that governed the relationship between consciousness and reality, and the techniques for accessing the cosmic library that contained all knowledge that had ever existed or would ever come into being. These highest levels of instruction required not only intellectual capability, but also demonstrated moral development and absolute commitment to using divine knowledge in service of cosmic order rather than personal advancement. The selection criteria for Mystery School students involved comprehensive evaluation of candidates' intellectual abilities, moral character, and spiritual development potential. Thoth developed sophisticated testing procedures that could assess not only current knowledge and capabilities, but also the deeper qualities of consciousness that would determine whether individuals could handle advanced divine teachings responsibly. The evaluation process included practical demonstrations of magical ability, theoretical examinations covering cosmic principles, and psychological assessments that revealed the candidate's fundamental motivations and ethical commitments. The initiation ceremonies that marked students' progression through different levels of Mystery School education served multiple functions beyond simple academic recognition. These rituals created profound psychological and spiritual transformations that prepared initiates for the responsibilities that accompanied advanced knowledge, while also establishing permanent psychic connections to the cosmic library that would allow them to access divine wisdom throughout their lives. The ceremonial procedures involved complex magical workings that required months of preparation and the coordination of multiple divine powers to achieve the necessary transformative effects. The teaching methods employed in the Mystery Schools reflected Thoth's understanding of how different types of consciousness absorbed and processed information most effectively. Visual learners received instruction through elaborate diagrams and symbolic representations that encoded multiple layers of meaning in single images, while auditory learners participated in chanted recitations that embedded cosmic principles in rhythmic patterns that enhanced memory and comprehension. Kinesthetic learners engaged in ritual activities and magical practices that allowed them to experience divine principles through direct physical manipulation of supernatural forces. The development of sacred texts that would preserve and transmit the Mystery School teachings required Thoth to create new forms of written language that could capture the full complexity of divine knowledge without losing essential meaning through translation or transcription errors. These texts employed multiple layers of symbolic encoding that allowed different levels of meaning to be accessed by readers with varying degrees of spiritual development. Beginning students could extract basic practical information from the same passages that revealed profound cosmic mysteries to advanced practitioners who possessed the keys to deeper interpretation. The creation of the hieroglyphic writing system that would become the foundation of the Egyptian civilization represented one of Thoth's most significant contributions to both divine and mortal education. Each symbol in this complex writing system carried not only literal meaning but also numerical values, astronomical correspondences, and magical properties that allowed written texts to function as active, spiritual technologies rather than passive information storage. The development of this multidimensional writing system required years of experimentation to determine which visual forms could most effectively encode the various types of information that needed to be preserved. The training of scribes who would be responsible for copying and preserving the sacred texts required the establishment of specialized educational programs that went far beyond simple literacy instruction. These programs taught students to recognize and reproduce the subtle variations in hieroglyphic forms that carried different magical properties, while also providing comprehensive education in the cosmic principles that gave meaning to the symbols they would be copying. The most advanced scribal training included instruction in the magical techniques necessary for creating texts that would remain accurate and powerful across centuries of use and copying. The establishment of scriptoriums where sacred texts could be produced and maintained required Thoth to develop new technologies for creating writing materials that could preserve divine knowledge indefinitely without degradation or corruption. The papyrus used for the most important texts was prepared using techniques that incorporated magical preservation spells into the manufacturing process, while the inks employed for writing contained substances that would maintain their clarity and magical properties for thousands of years. The writing instruments themselves were consecrated through elaborate rituals that established permanent connections to the cosmic sources of the knowledge being recorded. The organization of the cosmic library that served as the ultimate repository for all divine knowledge required Thoth to develop classification systems that could accommodate the infinite scope of information while allowing for rapid retrieval of specific items when needed. The library's structure transcended ordinary physical limitations, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions that could be accessed through different types of consciousness and spiritual development. The cataloguing system employed mathematical principles that created logical relationships between different types of knowledge, allowing researchers to discover unexpected connections and insights through systematic exploration of the collection. The access controls that governed use of the Cosmic Library ensured that sensitive information would only be available to individuals who possessed the wisdom and moral development necessary to handle such powerful knowledge responsibly. These controls operated through sophisticated magical mechanisms that could assess the consciousness of potential users and grant access to materials appropriate to their level of development. The most dangerous texts remained sealed behind barriers that required not only advanced magical ability, but also demonstrated commitment to using the contained knowledge in service of cosmic order rather than personal gain. The preservation techniques employed in the Cosmic Library protected divine knowledge against all forms of destruction or corruption, including the entropy effects that naturally degraded information over time. These preservation methods involved creating multiple copies of important texts in different dimensional layers, ensuring that even catastrophic damage to one level of the library would not result in permanent loss of essential knowledge. The magical techniques used for preservation also included temporal stabilization spells that prevented the gradual drift in meaning that could occur as language and cultural contexts evolved over centuries. The research facilities associated with the Cosmic Library provided divine scholars with the tools and resources necessary for advancing the frontiers of cosmic knowledge through original investigation and experimentation. These facilities included laboratories equipped with instruments for analyzing the fundamental forces that governed reality, observatories for tracking celestial phenomena across multiple dimensional planes, and workshops where new magical techniques could be developed and tested under controlled conditions. The coordination of research activities required sophisticated project management systems that could track multiple simultaneous investigations while preventing conflicts or dangerous interactions between different experimental programs. The dissemination of knowledge from the mystery schools to the broader divine and mortal communities required Thoth to develop communication networks that could transmit appropriate levels of information to different audiences without compromising the security of more sensitive teachings. Divine messengers carried advanced knowledge to other gods who needed specific information for their cosmic responsibilities, while mortal priests received carefully selected teachings that could guide human spiritual development without overwhelming their limited consciousness. The translation of divine knowledge into forms comprehensible to mortal minds required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and the limitations of earthly language. The establishment of branch schools throughout the cosmic realm allowed for the systematic expansion of divine education while maintaining the quality and security standards that Thoth had established in the original mystery school. Each branch facility required careful selection and training of local administrators who could maintain educational standards while adapting teaching methods to local conditions and student populations. The coordination between different schools involved regular communication and exchange programs that ensured consistency in curriculum and teaching quality across the entire educational network. The development of specialized curricula for different types of divine and mortal students required Thoth to create educational programs tailored to the specific needs and capabilities of various consciousness types. Warrior deities received instruction focused on the strategic and tactical applications of cosmic principles, while healer gods studied the mathematical relationships that governed life force and the techniques for manipulating these forces to restore health and vitality. Mortal rulers learned the principles of divine governance that could guide them in creating earthly societies that reflected cosmic harmony, while artisans received instruction in the sacred geometry and symbolic systems that could imbue their creations with spiritual power. The examination and certification systems that validated student achievement in the mystery schools required the development of testing methods that could accurately assess not only intellectual understanding, but also the practical ability to apply divine knowledge in real-world situations. These examinations included theoretical components that tested comprehension of cosmic principles, practical demonstrations of magical techniques, and ethical evaluations that assess the student's commitment to using their knowledge responsibly. The certification process created permanent records of individual achievement that could guide future educational and professional opportunities while also serving as quality control mechanisms for the educational system. The ongoing research and development programs that emerged from the mystery schools generated continuous advances in divine knowledge and technique that enhanced the effectiveness of cosmic governance and spiritual development. These research initiatives included systematic investigation of natural phenomena to discover new applications of cosmic principles, experimental development of improved magical techniques, and theoretical work on fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and reality. The coordination of research activities across multiple schools and disciplines required sophisticated project management systems that could track progress and facilitate collaboration while maintaining appropriate security for sensitive investigations. The influence of the mystery schools on mortal civilization became apparent as human societies began to develop more sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and spiritual practice. The knowledge transmitted through carefully selected mortal students provided the foundation for advances in architecture, engineering, agriculture, and governance that would characterize the golden ages of human civilization. The gradual dissemination of divine wisdom through mortal mystery schools created a bridge between divine and human consciousness that allowed for unprecedented cooperation in maintaining cosmic order and promoting spiritual development across all levels of existence. The establishment of the mystery schools marked not merely an educational achievement, but the transformation of Thoth from a deity bound by specific cosmic functions into something far more profound, the living embodiment of wisdom itself. As millennia passed and the immediate crises that had defined his earlier existence faded into carefully documented history, Thoth began to transcend the limitations of individual mythological narratives to become the eternal principle that governed all pursuit of knowledge and understanding throughout the Egyptian cosmos. This metamorphosis occurred gradually, as priests and scholars across Egypt began to recognize patterns in their spiritual experiences that pointed toward a unified source of all divine wisdom. The various mystery schools that had spread throughout the land reported remarkably consistent revelations during their most advanced initiation ceremonies, suggesting that their students were accessing not just Thoth's teachings, but his essential consciousness itself. The god who had once walked among other deities as their counselor and mediator was becoming something more fundamental, the cosmic principle through which all other divine beings accessed their own wisdom and understanding. The prophetic traditions that emerged from this transformation established Thoth as the ultimate source of oracular wisdom, whose insights could penetrate the veils of time to reveal the patterns that would shape future events. Unlike other forms of divination that relied on interpreting external signs or supernatural phenomena, Thoth's prophecies emerged from his comprehensive understanding of the mathematical relationships that governed cosmic development. His predictions were not mystical visions but logical extrapolations based on complete knowledge of current conditions and the natural laws that would determine their evolution. The Oracle of Thoth, established at the great temple complex of Hermopolis, became the most authoritative source of prophetic guidance in the ancient world. The elaborate procedures required for consulting this oracle reflected the profound nature of the wisdom being sought, involving months of preparation by both questioners and the priestly intermediaries who would facilitate communication with the divine consciousness. The questions submitted to the oracle had to be formulated with mathematical precision, as Thoth's responses addressed the exact parameters of what was asked, rather than providing the general guidance that characterized other oracular traditions. The prophetic pronouncements that emerged from these consultations revealed Thoth's unique perspective on the relationship between present actions and future consequences. His prophecies typically included detailed analysis of the various factors that would influence the development of questioned situations, along with specific recommendations for actions that could optimize outcomes or mitigate potential problems. The complexity of these prophetic analyses required specially trained scribes who could record and interpret the multi-layered communications that conveyed not just predictions, but comprehensive strategic guidance. The mathematical precision that characterized Thoth's prophetic work extended to his predictions about the great cycles of Egyptian civilization itself. His oracles foresaw the rise and fall of dynasties, the periods of prosperity and hardship that would test the nation's spiritual development, and the external challenges that would require divine intervention to overcome. These long-term prophecies provided the foundation for Egyptian historical consciousness, creating a framework that allowed the civilization to understand its experiences as part of a larger cosmic pattern, rather than random events without deeper meaning. The influence of Thoth's prophetic wisdom on Egyptian religious thought created fundamental changes in how the civilization understood its relationship with divine forces. Rather than viewing gods as capricious beings whose favour had to be won through elaborate offerings and rituals, Egyptians began to recognize divine activity as the expression of cosmic principles that operated according to comprehensible laws. This shift toward a more rational understanding of divine activity encouraged the development of sophisticated theological systems that could integrate spiritual practice with intellectual understanding. The mystery traditions that preserved and transmitted Thoth's deepest teachings evolved into elaborate initiatory systems that guided seekers through progressive stages of spiritual and intellectual development. These traditions recognized that the ultimate wisdom Thoth represented could not be simply communicated through ordinary teaching methods, but required fundamental transformation of consciousness that allowed individuals to perceive reality from the divine perspective. The initiation processes developed to facilitate these transformations involved carefully orchestrated experiences that systematically expanded the initiate's awareness and understanding. The Hermetic principles that emerged from these advanced initiatory traditions established the theoretical foundation for what would become known as the perennial philosophy, the recognition that all authentic spiritual traditions ultimately pointed toward the same fundamental truths about the nature of consciousness and reality. Thoth's role as the source of these universal principles made him the patron deity of all genuine seekers of wisdom, regardless of their cultural background or specific religious practices. The alchemical traditions that developed from Thoth's teachings on the transformation of consciousness and matter provided practical methods for applying divine principles to achieve both spiritual development and material mastery. These techniques recognized that the same mathematical relationships that governed cosmic phenomena also operated within human consciousness and could be manipulated through appropriate knowledge and practice. The alchemical work attributed to Thoth included not only methods for transforming base metals into gold, but also the far more significant processes for transforming ordinary human awareness into divine consciousness. The astrological systems that bore Thoth's influence reflected his comprehensive understanding of how celestial phenomena influence conditions throughout all levels of existence. Unlike simpler forms of astrology that focus primarily on predicting future events, Thoth's astrological teachings provided detailed analysis of how cosmic forces affected spiritual development and how individuals could align their activities with celestial influences to optimize their growth and effectiveness. The complexity of these astrological systems required extensive mathematical training and deep understanding of cosmic principles to apply effectively. The medical traditions that drew upon Thoth's wisdom recognized disease and health as expressions of the same cosmic principles that governed all other phenomena. The diagnostic techniques associated with Thoth's medical teachings involved comprehensive analysis of how various factors, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, combine to create specific health conditions. The treatments prescribed according to these principles addressed not just immediate symptoms, but the underlying imbalances that had created the conditions requiring healing. The architectural principles that emerged from Thoth's teachings on sacred geometry provided the foundation for construction projects that could channel divine forces to enhance the spiritual and practical functions of buildings. The temples, pyramids, and other monumental structures built according to these principles serve not just as impressive displays of human capability, but as functional spiritual technologies that could facilitate communication with divine forces and enhance the consciousness of those who use them appropriately. The governmental systems that incorporated Thoth's wisdom on divine law and cosmic order created the most stable and prosperous periods in Egyptian history. These systems recognized that effective earthly governance required alignment with the same principles that maintained cosmic order, creating legal codes and administrative procedures that reflected divine justice and promoted the spiritual development of the population. The rulers who successfully applied these principles achieved unprecedented levels of social harmony and material prosperity. The artistic traditions that drew inspiration from Thoth's teachings on symbolic representation created works that functioned as more than mere aesthetic expressions. The paintings, sculptures, and decorative arts produced according to these principles served as spiritual technologies that could transmit divine wisdom and facilitate transformative experiences for those who contemplated them with appropriate preparation and understanding. The symbolic systems employed in these artistic works encoded multiple layers of meaning that revealed deeper truths to viewers who possessed the keys to their interpretation. The literary traditions that preserved and transmitted Thoth's wisdom created the foundation texts that would influence spiritual and intellectual development throughout Egyptian civilization and beyond. These works employed sophisticated narrative techniques that could convey profound truths through stories and mythological accounts that operated simultaneously on multiple levels of meaning. The careful preservation of these texts required not only accurate copying, but also the maintenance of the interpretive traditions that could unlock their deeper significance. As the centuries passed and Egypt's political fortunes waxed and waned, Thoth's influence remained constant as the eternal source of the wisdom that had created and sustained the civilization's greatest achievements. The various historical crises that threatened Egyptian culture found their resolution through return to the fundamental principles that Thoth represented, while the periods of greatest prosperity and cultural flowering occurred when these principles were most fully implemented in practical governance and spiritual practice. The transformation of Thoth from mythological figure to eternal principle represented the ultimate achievement of Egyptian religious thought. The recognition that divine wisdom was not the exclusive possession of supernatural beings, but the fundamental nature of consciousness itself when properly developed and applied. This understanding made Thoth not just the patron of scribes and scholars, but the archetypal representation of human potential for achieving divine awareness through dedicated pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. The enduring legacy of Thoth as the eternal scribe and keeper of divine secrets established him as the ultimate source of all authentic wisdom traditions that would emerge from Egyptian civilization. His influence shaped not only the specific religious and cultural practices of ancient Egypt, but also the fundamental approach to knowledge and spiritual development that would characterize the civilization's contributions to human understanding. The principles he embodied, the pursuit of truth through systematic investigation, the integration of intellectual and spiritual development, and the application of divine wisdom to practical affairs, became the defining characteristics of Egyptian civilization at its highest expression. The final transformation of Thoth into pure divine principle transcended the limitations of individual personality and specific mythological narratives to become the eternal guardian of the sacred wisdom that connects human consciousness with its divine source. In this ultimate form, Thoth represents not just a particular deity within the Egyptian pantheon, but the universal principle through which all authentic spiritual and intellectual achievement becomes possible. His eternal presence ensures that the wisdom necessary for human spiritual development and cosmic harmony remains accessible to those who approach the pursuit of knowledge with the proper combination of intellectual rigor, moral development, and spiritual dedication that characterized his own divine nature throughout the magnificent tapestry of Egyptian mythology.